Yo, what is up, guys? How is it going? Hope you're having a lovely day, afternoon, evening, wherever you're coming at from. And we're here, no joke, on April Fool's Day. We're here for the great best meta debate where I've got three awesome guests of mine, all new to the podcast, which is a nice one to bring in here. And we're going to have a look back at the fever dream that has been Overwatch meta history. So without further ado, let's go from bottom right onwards. So starting with my man, Custa, everyone's going to introduce when they started playing Overwatch. So Custa, what up? Thank you for joining, man.
Yo, thanks for having me. When did I start? I think it was late 2015. Like when the beta got announced, I signed up for like everything, like every Reddit contest, every Twitter contest, all that kind of stuff. Hit up all my friends, and I was actually really fortunate to get in early on in the beta. I was actually in Australia at the time when it came out, and that's when I moved to Canada first. And yeah, I've seen it all. I've seen literally every meta that you could imagine. So I got a lot of things to say.
Perfect. The historian in the call today. Coming in next is BroYouWack, who loves April Fool's Day and is having a great day already. BroYouWack, how you doing?
I'm doing great. And I think I started play, it was right after Sombra dropped. It was in actually the first free-to-play weekend. That's how I got into Overwatch. And it was right in between season 2 and 3. So the first meta that I got, exposed to was the World of Tank meta. That was like my very first one.
We'll get to that traumatic experience not too long into the call. And finally, to round things off, my friend and fellow rank thrower, LemonKiwi. Lemon, what up?
I don't know about that.
We've lost enough games to call it that, Lemon. We've lost enough games.
You've lost with me. You are part of the L.
That's why I said fellow. I take 30% responsibility for it. 30%.
Okay. I forgot when I started Overwatch. I actually had to pull up my own Wikipedia, not to flex, to just be like, when did I even start casting, let alone when did I even start playing? So 2017 is probably when I started playing. And I think that whole year was probably a fever dream because I was casting like scrims and I was casting just people not knowing what to do in tier 3, which open division meta is its own little niche bubble. So it was a wild time.
That is unreally bougie flexing right there. Imagine just like quick self Google. When did I even do that?
Google.
Just Google myself. LemonKiwi Overwatch pulls it up. Oh yeah. Guys, you can tell LemonKiwi when she started playing. If you Google and you look at her Wikipedia, you can start telling her when she started playing.
That's how you know you made it, is when you can just simply Google yourself and you have at least 3 credible sources, like a Wikipedia page.
I don't feel good about only having a Wikipedia, though. It just doesn't feel as legit, but at least there's some record of it.
The weirdest thing for me is when I open my Wikipedia page and they know all 5 of my alts, including one that's named Dildo Mum, and I'm like, well, okay, people know too many things about me at this point.
Yeah, there's a limit to it. There's a limit to it. Oh yeah, and people are already bringing up Lemon can speak French fluently. So
fluently.
I can barely speak English fluently, but you got 2 under your belt, which is nice. Is that true or is that fake news?
Oh, fun fact. Yeah, that's a fun fact.
Nice. Okay, well, we'll expect some meta discussion in French for all my French viewers out there in a minute. But let's get right on to it. We're going to start from the beginning, all when it began with no hero limit. So for reference, guys, I'm going to try and put in a second a little image that you guys can look up as well that the guests are using as a little timeline. But me and Custa, I think we'll have to take this one. We're going to start all the way back when, for those you don't know, there were no hero limits, meaning you could pick 6 of the same hero if you wanted to on one team, which created for some rather wacky shit. So Custa, do you want to maybe describe to the listeners and the viewers what that was like?
So, I think we've all played the arcade mode at some point in the last few years where, you can stack multiple heroes and that kind of stuff. Think about actually mystery heroes. And, you play mystery heroes and the opposition team gets 3 bastions and you're like, man, this is so overpowered. They just won the lottery. Imagine being able to, opt into that kind of strategy and then being able to, counter that by playing, 6 Reapers and stuff like that. It really was just the Wild West of picking random heroes. The swaps were crazy. It was chaotic. And it was really fun. No game really existed like it other than Team Fortress 2, but the smoothness and the fluidity of the gameplay with all the ultimates is just it's what made a lot of people fall in love with Overwatch. But at the end of the day, it was just chaos. And there was so many different things. At first, the meta was 2-2-2, where you'd play 2 Reapers, 2 Lucios, 2 Winstons, and it is exactly as awful as you think it would be. One of my favorite metas actually of all time was the original dive, where you played 2 Zenyatas, 2 Tracers, a Symmetra, and a Lucio. So the reason this strategy worked, and I got to explain all these heroes because they've changed a lot since then, but Zenyatta's orbs only had 150 health, I think, at this point. Maybe it had 200 at this point, but the orbs stayed permanently. Once you put an orb on someone, there was no way to remove it from them. So you would put your healing orb on your Tracer. The Symmetra's job was she had an E ability which would put 50 shields on every character on her team. So she would just give 50 shields to the Tracers. So now all of a sudden you have a 200 health HP Tracer with a permanent healing orb always running around the map. And then the Symmetra, the Lucio, and the 2 Zens would just hide in a room trying to kill these 2 raid boss Tracers. And that was essentially a meta. And it was actually really fun, but so many ingenious things like that happened throughout the history of like this no hero limits. I think the real thing that like broke the back of like the developers being like, it's great for strategy, is the Team Envy 6 Diva stall on second point Hanamura. And I don't know if you've seen this clip at any point in your history, but essentially what would happen is everyone would just go Diva, and you could continuously cycle people coming out of spawn onto the point, to the point where they could never actually kill you and you could stall forever. And I think, like, how do you stop that from happening? You pretty much can't. And I think that pretty soon after that, hero limits got removed. Added.
No, that was a very good summary of some of the trauma that the early Overwatch, the early pioneers of Overwatch lived through. And that is something we're going to have to keep contextualizing, because I know a lot of you guys listening have maybe not been playing since the absolute start. So we're going to describe some stuff, and you're going to be like, that was a thing? Like, I cannot even believe that they would have
That's
a
me right now.
permanent Xeno. Yeah. Believe it or not.
It's funny that Custa does bring it up, because Symmetra not only had like 1 iteration, she's had like what, 3 iterations of not only her ultimate, but her ability. It was like a permanent shield that you would give at the beginning of a round, right? And it would just stay the whole entire time until someone dies. And when you describe like Symmetra being meta, it's crazy to think that that's even possible. Then you remember it's like, oh, well, she did have the E ability. I did not even remember that being a meta at all.
And there's 2 more.
Fuel,
go ahead.
6 turrets. And she was also that it was that was lock on Symmetra, where her left click wasn't like a beam. It was like if you were close to them, it would like kind of like lasso you to them, and it just did 1 million damage. Yeah, it was like it just like lashed onto them and did 1 million damage. It was a weird iteration of Symmetra.
and 2 other pieces of context I would add to that. One is back then her ultimate was different. Her ultimate was teleporter, so you would put it in one spawn and it would come out wherever you chose to put it, which is incredible for stall, because you could just put it behind the point A of something and people are just insta running back. Yeah. And remember that this is back when Torb had scrap. So he would pick up random pieces of scrap when someone, LemonKiwi's again, I know her face is getting shocked. So initially,
do you even remember this?
I remember the scrap. I remember the scrap.
So
remember the TP ult.
Yeah, so Symmetra had the TP ult, and she eventually had 2 ults, which is the shield generator, which we can talk about in a minute. But so Torb, every time someone died, they would leave some scrap, which don't ask what the lore behind that is, what the mechanism behind why every person who died left some pieces of scrap. But Torb could pick up that scrap and then throw armor packs out. Not like Brig armor packs, which, went off. They were literally just these little floating, like a mega health pack, would just float on the ground, and you run over and pick it up, and it would give you that armor. What was it, 50, 75 for like?
I think it was 50. But it could have been 75. There were so many broken things back in the day that like was just fun to have. It's kind of like Engineer from Team Fortress 2. I really feel like they just took Engineer and was just like, yeah, here you go, Torbjorn.
Make him a gnome.
Yeah.
So if you think like a Brig pack Tracer is scary now, wait until you had the Symmetra buffed Torb packed Tracers with the perma Zen orb running around everywhere. So that was some severe trauma. I'm guessing that won't chart anywhere on your favorite. I mean, you did say you really had a fond nostalgia for it, Custa.
Yeah, it's one of those things that like you look back on really fondly, but if you made me play it again today, I'd be like, this is the worst thing ever. But it's kind of like, playing like World of Warcraft Classic. You're like, it was so much fun when I was a kid, and you play it now and you're like, well, this was awful. Why did I enjoy this at all? That's kind of like how I imagine these things. It's a fun part of history, but I'm glad it's gone.
Yeah, I'm glad that we moved away from that. Lemon and Zach, you guys happy that we removed no hero limit, or we added hero limits?
So it's funny that you say that because it's one of those things where like you don't know what you don't know. So I joined around when they just changed it to where you can only pick one hero per team, and I thought, well, yeah, I mean that's just Overwatch. But I mean, as terms of like meme purposes, because it's kind of funny in this call we have a competitive player, someone who spectates competitive player, and then me, who's more like I would describe as like competitive casual. So the 5 Winstons. You think of it as a strat. I think of it just like meme videos of all the Winstons just jumping out from the back line, and Superman music is playing in the background, and so that kind of stuff you never got to see anymore. And so that's, I think, when like the fun aspect of Overwatch started to like take a drop. But that's also when I joined. So I mean, it's not crazy to think, but I think that's just a good way of how Overwatch has evolved over the time.
Yeah,
In one aspect, the fun
I
went
joined
down, another aspect, it went
after
up.
the hero limit thing, but I think I would throw up everywhere if I had to cast like 5 tracers. I think that I would just mentally collapse. So I'm glad I came in after all the trauma and we're going into a better place.
I think so too. I think it's funny because initially it was one of the things the devs were pretty certain that they didn't want to remove. Like I think on release they were like, no, it's really integral to the spirit of Overwatch that you can pick whatever you want whenever you want. And then I guess they saw the 6 Diva stall and they were like, yeah, I don't know about this, bro.
No.
It's like people used to like applaud people because like there were like Gosu Gamer weeklies like tournaments happening on the weekends, and people used to like applaud. Like Seagull, I remember, had this like Lijiang Garden strategy where they just rolled out with 3 bastions, and everyone's like, look at that ingenuity, it's genius, they're so smart. And then it did have that fun aspect of like you could come out with whatever you wanted, but as I said, it becomes an impossibility to balance, and eventually it just devolved into chaos where everyone ended up as Tracer, as LemonKiwi said. So it had its drawbacks.
Exactly. And one thing honorable mention I'm going to add, because if you use the exclamation mark meta history command, and YouTube, when you watch this later, I'll put a link to the chart later. One thing I'll add that I haven't mentioned yet is the body shot Widow meta, which is a brief meta that maybe Custa will remember, but there was a time when Widow's body shot did 150 damage. So she could one-shot Tracers.
And Zenyatta's fun fact.
Zenyatta
also had 150 health, so she would just like kill everyone instantly with a body shot. So yeah, it was another not fun time.
and that was also at a time too where you can like quick scope with her too, so the charge shot would just be even faster too. And
Cassidy also didn't have fall off damage as well. Fun fact. So a lot of people countered Widow by playing Cassidy and just aiming better than the Widow. It was weird times.
Shoot head. Better.
Yeah, just aim better.
And his right click was ridiculous. It's ridiculous now in a way, but it was ridiculous back then too, where you could just like 2 right clicks hog down basically.
I want to say it was 70 damage a shot of the right click. So if you hit every single shot, it was like, what is that? 420 damage. Nice. So it's like it was pretty good.
Matt's on stream. You're a brave man, Custa. Brave man.
You're brave.
Okay, so when we finally, removed ourselves from the trauma and sanity came in and hero limits were implemented, we started to see, a lot more different style of comps. So I've got a couple notes here. Let's start talking with the 5-man res. So again, for some of you who are new, to Overwatch, you may only know Mercy as the beloved Moth who flies around in Valkyrie form, but originally her ability, her ultimate was Resurrect, and she could resurrect 5 teammates who've been dead. They would all leave souls like they do now, and eventually she would swoop in, and if how many of them were in her immediate vicinity, she would press Q, and they'd all come back to life. And this developed in a meta where basically you were told to die at the same time. Like your team was demanded that you should all die within the same space of time. So they all pumped their ultimate. They'd use like the Grav, Dragon, Genji Blade, because back then everyone would just stack all their ults at once. And then they would wipe 5 of you, and then out from nowhere, this was the hide and seek meta as it was called, because the Mercy would be hiding. She'd come flying in. It'd be the job of the Genji to find her. He'd never find her. He'd get flamed all day for it. She'd fly in, res 5 people, and that was it. The whole fight was wasted. So, guys, do you remember fondly the 5-man res meta?
I know Custa does. I just know I want him to talk about it first.
You want me to go first? Okay.
Well, I know you're biased towards it, but I do want to know your perspective from a competitive player, but also a Mercy main at that time, because you got drafted by the Fuel as a Mercy main, correct?
Well, I was a flex support actually, but back
Okay.
then Mercy was a flex support because Lucio was almost like a must pick in early days of
Yeah.
Overwatch. So the flex support
Oh.
really just sort of played everything, and that's why when the Moth Mercy came out, it's like I've been playing Mercy for years at this point. But the best way I describe hide and seek Mercy is, you know, that scene from the movie The Shining where you're like hiding in the bathroom and then like the axe comes through the window. That axe is a tracer, like looking for you as you're trying to hide in the wall. But like the thing that people don't realize about it as well, like in the early days of Overwatch, the radius was enormous as well. Like they did nerf it, I think, later on with the mass res, but like you could sit in the spawn of King's Row in the third point and just wait in there. So it was an easier hide and seek. It was literally just a hide and wait. And then your team would die on the cart and then you would just press Q and everyone would come up. But it got more complicated as they reduced the size of it. People are just looking for you, hunting. There's always that one teammate on your team that's like, no, I'm just going to try and live through the res instead of dying. And then as you res, they die. So then they don't come back to life. And you're just like, it was a weird time because nothing has ever been like that in Overwatch ever since then. And then like some people were really good at hiding. I sucked at hiding. I like playing the game. So it was a fun time playing Mercy back then, but another one where I'm glad it's come and gone.
How dare you want to play the game?
And I think people have to remember that it was like an instant res. It's not like Mercy where it's like slowly, it's like people die, boom, they're back to life like that.
It was like this slow motion trauma where you see her like hovering, guarding, angeling in, and you're just like, no, don't let her. And then Q, everyone's back. And then even if you did kill her, which happened a lot, like the Mercy would die immediately afterwards, but too late. Job done. 5
The
people
worst
back.
was casting it too, because you're like, oh my god, big team fight, you're screaming, but you're getting edged by a hiding Mercy because you also don't see where the Mercy is hiding. So you're like, oh, is there gonna be a res? And then you would have a 5-man res, and you're like, oh, and here we go again. Oh shit. And you're like going back into casting. It was so bad because you couldn't properly hype up a fight because of that. And it kind of killed actually a lot of it.
And I know, at least from a viewer's perspective, this is when I first heard about like metas and whatnot, and I saw pro players like constantly complain about it. In fact, like I saw every single like Fuel member hate on the Mercy Man. I heard XQC and just everyone just hate the fact that skill was basically negated by one single button. Like that was really the I win button back in the day.
It was the early immortality.
Yeah, that's it, right? Like it was the pain point of the community, right? Like Mercy, like back then, you know, we all like to hate on like, Baptiste now because of the immortality field. That's what it was back then. Is like this Mercy res is like you have to play Mercy because if you just don't have multiple people being res, like you're literally playing like what is it, like 9v6 at that point. So you had to play Mercy, and the sad reality is when they got rid of the mass res, they introduced something even more cursed, which was the Moth meta. So that's why Mercy's been meta for just like ever almost.
Yeah, and we'll get to the Moth meta in a second, but I just wanted to mention a couple more honorable things before we get again to the infamous Moth meta that I'm sure Custa will have plenty of feelings on. So a couple notes that I put down were, I think this is worth explaining, the triple DPS from Rogue, and then the triple quad tank from Envious. So again, a little bit of context, and I'm sure Custa and Zach, you seem to be quite fond of that period yourself as well. But essentially the two dominant Western teams, Rogue and Envious. Rogue were famous for their triple DPS style. So they had, again, this is going to sound weird to people now, but they had AKM on Soldier always. They had Soon on Tracer always. And then they would have Nico flex between Genji and Diva, which is a very bizarre hero pool to have. But this was what it was. It was the flex between Genji and Diva. And then they would have like a Winston and a Lucio and I think a Zen, maybe Ana's. Is that right?
It went through so many different like iterations of people doing those kind of things. The thing that made Rogue and Envy so strong is that because of how strong Mercy was for all the reasons that we just highlighted, you could actually solo heal as Mercy. So what happened is they had wins on Rogue and there was Harry Hook on Envy, and both of them had very good aim for support players compared to, you know, their usual Lucio counterparts. So you would play like Soldier, Cassidy, and you just play these like high damage compositions, even a Symmetra on first point defenses. And it was just so much damage that was almost impossible to overcome. And it was like a really interesting thing. And then what ended up being the way to break it was these triple and quad tanks, like you were saying earlier.
Exactly. So, and I think that's one that I remember Taimu became very, very famous for when he got picked up, I think, for the Apex tournament when he pulled out the Roadhog. And this is Hook 1.0 days, guys. So if you think there's some BS hooks now, there were some even more BS hooks back then. And so this was like a real period of time when, again, these two teams were really successful running these kind of comps. And it was really fun actually to watch the kind of philosophical conflict. We don't tend to get that a lot these days in Overwatch. You know, we tend to get mostly mirror matches. But back then you would get this sort of real philosophical combat between one team who thinks that the game should be played this way, another team that should be played this way. So, Zach, what was your kind of assessment of that time of Overwatch?
Well, it's kind of like what you said at the beginning, where you and what Custa said, where you can really have a wide range of different heroes way before hero lock, whatever it was called, where some people can play 3 Bastions, or some people think that you should play 2 Tracers, 2 Zenyatas, whatever the case may be. And then I think slowly over time, it did just evolve into mirror matches where it was really put on display, like with GOATs, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. But that's, I think, what was so fun to see at the highest level, is that, like, okay, yeah, these people are good, but they're not just playing one single comp, and what are we best at, and we're going to run with that. And then it slowly transformed into like the Mercy meta, where you have to play around that, and then the Bastion meta, and then whatever else came after that.
Let me know your memories of that. Sorry, go ahead.
Metas just became less fun over time.
I agree with that.
Like, that's just me. That's just me.
I agree.
No, it is partly the doing of the Overwatch League, and we'll get to that in a second as well. But Lemon, what was your memories of all of that? Pre-Overwatch League, Overwatch.
I don't know. I still feel like without the 2-2-2, everyone just kind of revolved around DPS, and it just became so deathmatchy, especially like casting like Contenders China and Korea. Like, they just really love running like the 4 or 5 DPS even if they could. So glad I came in after the hero limits, but I'm one of the very few people who actually like the also role lots, because in certain regions it was really hard to just watch Tracers, Sombras, Pharahs in the air, and everyone's DPS, and you have one Mercy just flying in between everyone, and it was just horrible to keep track of.
Well, it's nice to get that caster's perspective on it, that, you kind of felt from a viewing perspective wasn't too great for you, because I guess tinged with all this, of course, is our personal nostalgia, because obviously, we were young and fresh.
Playing it is a different story, yeah.
Yeah, and Overwatch seemed so exciting and titillating at the time. Now we're jaded, old, and bitter, but, I certainly do think that it was quite fun. Me personally, I remember I have a lot of fond memories of kind of like that, Envious v Rogue, and then it became this contest later between like Lunatic High and stuff, like the West versus the East, where it was like, Korea had their own version. They were always a favorite, that kind of dive style, and it kind of became this clash where it came in, and it was like, can Envious and Rogue turn over these guys? Because teams like Lunatic High were just dominant for a long period of time. So yeah, I mean, Custa, what did you make of all that period?
Yeah, like that's like an interesting point. There's about a year and a half there of like where we'd moved past like a lot of like the triple and quad tank. And I think it's really the release of Ana that marks a massive shift in the way that the game was played. Before that, it was like these quad tanks, these high DPS, all those kind of things with the Lucio Zens. When Ana came in, like, she sort of changed the game, especially with how her Nano Boost functioned when it first came out, because the Nano Boost did the exact same thing it does now, except it didn't give you 300 health. And it gave you, I think, a 50% speed boost. And that is a very important note of think about when you get nanoed, think about now you can move 50% faster. It might have been 30, but you can move way faster than you usually could. So for that reason, that's what created the Beyblade meta, which is on this list here, is what you would do is you would put it on your Reaper, and when he Death Blossomed and when you Lucio speed boosted, he would kind of run at the speed in which you do as a Zen transcending right now. Yeah, see, Zach's got it with the Reaper mask. It was something that, like, you just couldn't do anything about it. And people didn't really know the full value of Diva Matrix at this point. Yeah, you would just like spin around and run at the opposition, and you couldn't run away. So that was fun. It was fun for a little bit, and fortunately it was only meta for a little bit. But then that entered into the era just after Envy beats the Korea. And that's like the first time a Western team has beaten a Korean team in Korea, and also the last time that ever happened. We actually transition into the dive meta. And as we know, Korea is significantly better at dive, and especially when you put it on the Genji. So the Nanoblade starts going on the Genjis, and you start to see these legends born like Who Are You and Hackfist.
Yeah, again, so many little bits to note there, because again, one thing about the speed boost is you could put it on the Reaper, And one thing we have to make a note of is that objectively, players were kind of worse back then in the sense that the scale of what the players perform at now is just way better. Like really clunky, awkward stuff was happening in 2017. So much so that, like the Reaper just hiding around a corner was like half the strength of a Reaper, where literally, it's such a basic thing now. You would just check a corner, make sure there's not a Reaper just lurking right there. But, they would just sit there. They just sit there and press Death Blossom. And of course, this is when Reaper had souls, not lifesteal. So every time he kills someone, they would leave a little soul and you pick it up and he heals them instead. So there's all this clunky shit going on. But yeah, you could put the Nano Boost on a Reinhardt and now he could actually catch up to people and actually hit them with the hammer. So this form, like that is, I think, a really significant point to note. The Nano Boost, how that kind of enabled all of that, the speed of the Nano Boost, which eventually would go away. But Zach, what did you kind of... do you enjoy the speedy Nano, or do you prefer the health boosted Nano?
So I think this was like, I want to say like literally after that patch came out, because I didn't play that. That was season 2, the Beyblade meta, I want to say, and then it was the World of Tank meta where you had it was a Reinhardt, Diva, and a Zarya, and a Lucio and Ana, and it may be like a tank or a DPS like with the Genji and whatnot. You would throw your Ana grenade on the tanks. You would amp it up with Lucio because that was when the amp was really powerful. And then it was kind of like a predecessor to the GOATS meta. And it just wasn't like that's when you start to see like more like just brawly comps, which I think Lemon really likes, which I don't. I like being a DPS player, but also just being like a 13-year-old kid that just wants to see a bunch of kills. Like that was kind of like, okay, I don't like this meta, but then I don't know how they changed it. But I remember like they either nerfed the amp it up or they nerfed the grenade of Ana. So I don't have fond memories of season 3, season 2 meta, but I do remember that was like my first like exposure of like metas at that time.
Lemon, how was the Beyblade casting?
Great. Any meta where there was one ult that could kill 6 people, big fan. And Beyblade was cool because you could make so many spitty top, helicopter, any kind of jokes. It was very easy to make references about. And you could probably see the Reaper set up pretty well. He's usually right above, so you have this moment to prepare, and then everyone dies, and it was like a cool, like, wah, hype moment. It was also amazing to watch. Anything where people are clumped up were always my favorite metas, and I miss Reaper. I think Reaper, like anything Reaper, has always been part of my favorite metas.
It's always Reaper Fridays in this house.
Always Reaper Fridays.
Yeah, and I think we'll kind of get to that because I think we're alluding to some metas that'll come in that will be quite dominant for a while, like like Dive, eventually Goats and stuff. But there's a couple more things I want to name check because they deserve their mention. We kind of vaguely mentioned the Ironclad Bastion. But Zach, do you want to elaborate on that? Because that sounds like that when you came in.
Ironclad Bastion, that was when it was either 20 or 30%. Well, Custa and Lemon.
I think it was even higher than that.
Was it like 40?
It was 50. It was 50 to start with. I think it was 50 or something.
It was 50? Okay, so basically,
maybe
so
40.
he basically got a passive ability, which when he was in turret mode, he got a 50% damage reduction. So on top of him having armor, he got a damage reduction in the most lethal position that you could be in with a Bastion. That was really the first like pirate ship comp that we saw. And that was, I think, the first moment where we really saw a true broken hero, where it's just like, you lose if you don't have a Bastion. At least with Mercy, like you just kill the Mercy, but you couldn't kill the Bastion. And it was literally the worst time to play Overwatch because it just took one person to break that game, and it was not fun at all.
So a combination of historians in chat and a bit of Googling. It was 50 on the PTR back when they would actually, the PTR was the equivalent of the experimental is now, or they would give it to us for like a week in the PTR and then decide whether they want to put it in or not. It went to 35% live, and then eventually it settled on 20%.
Okay. Yeah. It was like I remember just how traumatizing that was. Like we talk about trauma, that was the most traumatizing meta, even though it was just a short period of time. It was terrible.
I have like a fond memory of like, I know it was on Dorado third point at some point. I don't know if he got nanoed. I don't know if he was but I remember grabbing a Bastion, being like a whole 16 just standing around and wailing on him, and we couldn't kill him. Like he just didn't die. And that was like the moment that I was like, this is just like as you said, it's not even like, oh, there's no, like, oh, we're just not playing the right combo. No, it's like there is no counterplay to what is happening here. He is just stronger than everyone else. And yeah, I think it only stayed in the game for about a week or two.
Yeah, it was like 2 weeks or something.
Before it really got heavy-handed nerfed.
Oh, Lemon did warn us that her camera might crash, by the way. So if you're wondering why on screen, I'm now LemonKiwi, and there's a picture of a young anime girl as on where SVB formerly was. That's entirely intentional. So that's our true selves now. So I was gonna ask Lemon's take. I don't know if Lemon is still in the call. Can you still hear us, Lemon?
I think she's definitely. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll wait for Lemon to come back. But yeah, that was a bit of nightmare fuel. I think the Ironclad Bastion. I think, let me see here. So February 28th it was put in, and then 3rd of March they reversed. So it was like a week basically.
Yeah.
A hellish week where only Bastion and Custa has 6 teammates wailing on the one guy who won't die. This without immortality. This is so.
And it was all an effort. It was all an effort just to try to make him better. Like that's the point of like these. Like there was some like big irrational buffs at the beginning. Whether it was like with Mercy, or with the nerf, or a buff with Bastion. He's still one of the worst heroes, but they tried to make him good, and they achieved that. But they just do a little bit too much, and you know.
Do you guys remember when he had a shield? Oh, wait, did either of you play at the time when he had a shield?
That was before the launch, pre-launch. I know of it, but I never faced the terror.
Was he good with the shield, or was he like still?
Well, it was just more oppressive in the fact that, so for people that don't understand, when you were in sentry form, you had a shield kind of like Brig has when she's like holding right click. So Bastion just had that in sentry form. So you had to get through like a 200 health shield before you could even shoot the Bastion. And it was like, Bastion still wasn't that good because it was so immobile, but people were so bad at the game as well that it was like he would just sit in a corner and no one could kill him. So it was weird times.
Do you guys remember when everyone thought Genji countered Bastion like really hard? Because like back then people wouldn't stop shooting the Bastion if he just like the Bastion just wouldn't stop. He'd get in sentry and just hold left click or the console equivalent. And back then everyone was like, just pick Genji.
That's the first counter that I got taught, like, because Bastion's a popular hero for new players because you just shoot and you kill things. So okay, counter, deflect, you kill the Bastion and you win. So that's really like, it's funny that you bring that up because like I thought he was a counter for Bastion, but it's because I don't see Bastion at all, so I never have to think what counters the Bastion.
No, but it was genuinely what the entire community settled on. Like for a while, they were just like, if they have Bastion, you have to pick Genji, stand in his face, and press E, and then he'll never think to stop shooting. Like it just won't occur to him to stop shooting. Lemon,
and
you're
when
back.
they did stop shooting, you were like, oh shit.
What do I do now? I didn't think this far ahead. Lemon, what did you make of the what we were talking about? We were talking about the Ironclad Bastion.
I don't even remember that, so I'm gonna take a pass. I might have just like bleached my brain from whatever that was.
The lucky ones.
Perhaps for the best. Perhaps for the best. I noted down as well quickly the shield generator. So again, just for anyone who wasn't familiar, this is when they again it's interesting to think about this. There's a couple heroes that have clearly always been problematic. Bastion being one that they could never get right. Symmetra's another one. We mentioned that, you know, she's gone through many iterations. One of those was they gave her 2 ultimates. The only time they've ever done that in Overwatch. It was a choice of 2 ultimates. You either have your normal teleporter, which was one end sits in spawn, the other end sits wherever you want, which people would use this to grief other people by putting it at the edge of the map. So that immediately you press it out of spawn, off the map you go, no chance to respawn. You know, and then everybody 6 times report the Symmetra. And then they gave her the choice of a shield generator. And this would work in the same way where you could place one end of it wherever you wanted. And in a huge radius, without LOS considerations, everyone in your team would get, what was it, 50? 75 armor?
I think it was 75.
75 shields, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. It was so oppressive. Sorry to jump in. But
no, you go ahead.
Let me describe to you, like, let me set you a thought picture here of you're attacking first point Hollywood, right? And then all of a sudden the Symmetra gets a shield generator and she puts it in that back pit of the first point of Hollywood. So now the defensive team all has 75 shields permanently until you can kill the shield generator. The shield generator has like 500 health, so the Tracer can't pulse bomb it either. So your entire team just has to bum rush this shield generator, and the entire team is just between you and that shield generator, and that's it. And then the worst thing on top of that is that people would play Torbjorn with the scrap armor packs during this time as well. So you would have 75 shields, 75 armor, and then nobody was killable at that point. And like it was almost like a GG at that point that you just lost the fight. So lost the map. So it had some interesting things. That was another one that didn't last very long. I think it was only about 6 months that shield generator lasted in the game.
Yeah, I think back then, you've heard of eco pushes now. I think back then it was an eco push to like solo Dragonblade the shield generator. Like that was a thing you would do. Where it's like send the Genji, have him blade it or something, and now we can actually play Overwatch. So Lemon, I'm gonna take it to you. Do you remember shield generator Symmetra and armor packing Torbs?
Yeah, it was really bad to watch, especially on assault maps where I felt like the point B defensive spawn was just so deep. Like I'm just remembering where you'd have Volsky stick a shield generator just so far deep in there, and as the offense, you're just scrounging to get to like so deep into Volskaya B just to get that stupid shield generator. And I remember it having like a decent amount of health too. I don't know if I'm misremembering. So it's not like you could
have
just
a lot.
you can't just send like a tracer to go deal with it, or at least it wasn't easy. So it was very unfun, just particularly for assault. But I don't remember it being super horrible for other game types. But that was a long time ago.
Yeah, well, you didn't have reliable places to put it on, like payload and King of the Hill, right? Because the fight was much more fluid. But yeah, Zach, what did you make of all that?
I remember her having a shield generator. I don't remember it being so oppressive. Maybe it was because like just people didn't. Symmetra was still seen as a terrible hero a terrible support hero at this time, and I don't remember too much about it actually.
It's good to mention though that she was a support hero. Actually, I actually blanked that she was once. I mean, this is back when there was no role lock, so it really didn't matter where she was categorized.
Oh yeah, that's true.
But yeah, she was a support, and this is back when you get all those obnoxious messages like "not enough healers" or "not enough snipers."
Yeah. Not enough damage. You're like, oh, okay, sure.
Exactly. So that was one thing, and another thing I noted down, which I think was another really oppressive on assault, maybe not so present elsewhere, was the Sombra health pack healing and ult charge giving. So again, this is when Sombra was released. On release, for those of you guys who don't know, when she hacked a health pack, if a teammate took that health pack, it would give Sombra the equivalent ult charge of whatever she healed. So this generated in a meta where essentially you take a fight. This is really dominant on Anubis. I remember very vividly, Temple of Anubis was defined, and Volsky as well was defined by Sombra would hack the mega under the bridge. You take a fight, everybody make sure they don't heal. They don't let the other healer heal it. There was usually one healer that you'd play. You don't let that healer heal it. You run down to the bridge. You all take turns. You all huddle around it like a campfire. You take turns grabbing that mega. Sombra would get EMP. You fly in, EMP, kill them. All the poke damage you took, you run back to the bridge. You sit and you all take turns on the health pack. Sombra's like 80% to her next EMP already. And this was just the misery which was inflicted upon you every time you played. And this was really dominant at the pro level. I remember that. So, Custa, what was your memories of it?
Yeah, so I actually remember this pretty heavily because this is like in the dead zone of 2017 where like no tournaments really happened. And there was one tournament. I actually played with Arc 6, which is actually a funny team because it's like XQC, Dante, Space, myself, Ginger Pop, and ZZA. And it was this thing, I literally made an alt account to learn how to play Sombra because it was the flex supports that ended up picking up the Sombra. You would play a solo heal Lucio, and the flex support on second point Anubis would hack that mega pack, and you would literally have Sombra EMP almost every fight, and it was like a never-ending cycle. And it was another one of those things that you're just like, this is so stupid because we can't ever enter. So it was one of those metas where it's like nobody's shooting at each other intentionally except for the Sombra because no one wants to give the other team like EMP. So it was just a never-ending cycle of going back and forth on that.
Zach, do you remember much of that?
This is exactly when I joined. Like Sombra was my first hero, and so I was still like roughly like a level 50, so I was still learning the game. Sombra, I don't remember her being so oppressive because people at the lower ranks just didn't understand how important EMP was. But looking at it now, yeah, EMP is like one of the closest we win button. Like press it's like you win. Even still now, EMP is I think still one of the better ultimates to use, but to just farm it on a single health pack, yeah, that's like what Custa said. It's not fun. You're huddled in a campfire, not going out and winning and shooting each other.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that a lot of the the metal ranks didn't really catch on, because I remember another vivid community event was my man Frito. Shout out to Frito. He released a video from Overwatch called "Sombra is a Support," And I remember this became like a complete event in the community where people were like, what is this man talking about? He's an absolute idiot. He does not understand. Sombra is clearly not a support. She's categorized as damage. Of course, it essentially was her function. She was just there to heal you and, you know, win fights. But I remember that being a thing. But Lemon, what was that like for you?
I think it was great as a support player. Like, if your flex support or any other support is ignoring you, then you just go grab a health pack. And I felt like it was like a team effort of just the Sombra would hack it, and it was a good mega, and everyone just like parties around the health pack and helps the Sombra, and then she would help you by EMPing and killing stuff. So, as a support player at the time, I was stoked for that. But I don't know if it was strong, but I liked it that it was giving ult charge.
You were vibing. You were enjoying
I was
it.
vibing. I'm helping the team by taking damage and feeding, and then giving her ult charge. It was great.
Yeah, maybe we need that again. No, I have fond memories of Wells because it was interesting in a way. It just became so obnoxiously oppressive that it, you know, there were like, again, certain maps, that was it. So I think it was an interesting idea, but perhaps just went a little bit far. Okay, so let's fast forward. We talked about Sombra getting released as a hero. Now, who remembers when Doomfist got released? And his hitboxes were, I mean, if you think his hitboxes are bad now, they were even a bit more nutty back then. And that was when his punch was the size of Jupiter. And, you know, if you were caught in the vague vicinity, you were gonzo. Custa, I can see you're kind of already smiling about it.
It was funny because, like, he was such a bad hero on release because of his hitbox being so big. But also, like, think about all the things of, like, why Doomfist is so oppressive in your brain now. No one knew how to do that back when it first came out. So everyone was just like, their way of thinking they could get kills is just punching from in front of you, which we all know is like a death sentence now. So
That's still what I do.
Yeah, same. And it just, for some reason, it never works for me like the other people. But it's just like, it's one of those things that just, it was such a high skill capped hero, and it still is to this day, that it was just so bad when it first came out. So people were like, oh, this hero is trash. The ultimate's the worst ultimate in the game, all that kind of stuff. So we didn't actually see a lot of Doomfist for, I would say, about a year after he got released. There was like obviously some annoying moments where he's just, as you said, punching you from Narnia, but it was like, it wasn't that oppressive as we see him today.
There was like a very brief period, I think it was like a week, because I remember he came out and he was really bad, and then they tweaked his hitbox a little bit, and then Effect, I remember on the Dallas Fuel, just like was making him look super broken, and then they did something again. I only have vague memories of this, but I think they like tweaked his hitboxes back and forth a little bit, and then yeah, he just immediately went out the meta. But it was one of those moments where, yeah, for a second people were like, whoa, what is this thing? And then it was no longer a thing, much like our friend LemonKiwi. Hey guys, SVB here, just gonna quickly interrupt this episode of the Group Up podcast to say that if you're enjoying this content, then please do consider signing up for my Patreon to support me directly. It's really amazing because it allows me to keep making content like this carefree, regardless of how many views Overwatch does or doesn't get. I know no one likes sellout ads, but chances are if you've listened till this far in, then you're at least somewhat enjoying the content. So please do consider at least leaving a like, subscribe, and a comment underneath the video on YouTube. It really does help. But that's it for me. Now back to the discussion.
It's funny that you bring that up, Custa, because like I think I try to remember that time period, and yeah, like Doomfist is such like a high skill cap hero. Nobody was doing diagonals. CarQ hadn't made his video talking about the best like spots of where to like diag, and then like there was no rollout spots yet. So yeah, everyone was just punching and just trying to do their best. And then like it's weird to think that at one point Doomfist was terrible, but then again, like just over the time periods, he gets nerfed, people adapt, and then he becomes broken. He gets nerfed, people adapt, he becomes broken again. So Doomfist has always been just, I never liked Doomfist just for that reason, is that he always finds his way back into the meta, in my opinion.
Yeah, nobody was getting quaked on back then.
In your ranked games that are just like running you down. So at least we can all agree that it's CarQ's fault that Doomfist is good now.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, something to take
we can
out.
all agree. We all hate CarQ. That's how it is. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it again just goes to show you how much we've evolved and how much we've sort of perfected certain elements of the game. But a couple more points that I noted was double sniper, and I think that goes in harmony with pirate ship as well, because I think this was around the time Junkertown releases, and suddenly people realize we could just put a Bastion on the card. This is with original Orisa shield HP. We could just sit like Orisa on top. Yeah, it was pretty bad, and it was like 100% uptime. Yeah,
it was something crazy. Stupid high. Yeah, I remember watching an Orisa thing, because the thing that I forget about it as well is that I watched a video recently of the Orisa pull is enormous. Like it's about a third less than what it once was. So you could just pull people from forever. And yeah, as you said, this really became the beginning of bunker comps, right? You know, where you just stand behind shields, double snipers become prominent, and then if you're a support, you don't play the game anymore, and you just hope your Widowmaker is better than the other one, right? So, not my favorite meta.
Yeah, I'm just looking through some of her patch notes. So when Orisa released, she wasn't really played. No one really liked her. They were like, why would we pick this hero? And they started like, this is when the terms power creep really became a thing, because they were kind of slowly buffing her, trying to encourage people to play her. So I can just see here, they're like, we're going to reduce the cooldown from 12 to 8 seconds. We're going to make the barrier a little bit bigger. We're going to give Orisa a faster projectile speed. This, that, the other, blah, blah, blah.
Oh,
and yes, it was a 900 barrier on an 8-second cooldown. So do with that what you will, essentially. And a gigantic halt as well. So there was the pirate ship. And then, of course, it turned into double sniper as well with like the Hanzo Widow. I remember that vividly on Junkertown a lot, where people were kind of running this back when Havana wasn't a thing. Zach, did you do? Oh, go ahead, Custa. Go ahead.
No. Zach, you want to go?
I don't remember double snipe. I didn't even know that was a thing. Maybe again, just because like a diamond and masters and around that rank, like it's just, you know. But I do vividly remember pirate ship and like Orisa like creeping into the meta just because of somebody else. Like that always happens with Orisa. Orisa herself is never like, from what I've seen, meta herself just by herself. It's always because of Bastion, because of Roadhog, because of Baptiste, because of just somebody else. And yeah, like when she first came out, nobody picked her over Reinhardt or Dive with like, I don't know if Dive was still meta around this time, but just, yeah, she was not a good hero until of somebody else. And that always happens throughout the whole entire years of Orisa.
Poor Orisa, never the always the bridesmaid, never the bride. Is that the saying? She's always kind of there to make someone else's day. But you just sit there, shield on cooldown, holding left click. Anything else any more memories of that, Custa, before we move on? LemonKiwi, by the way, for those who are listening to this later, she's, you know, RIP momentarily. We'll bring her back later.
As I said, I think this, like 2017 was a really weird era, because, especially for me, because like I've been very heavily competitive sided for so long, is that in 2017, there was about a 6-month or like a 9-month period where after the first few months of 2017, Blizzard cut off a lot of tournaments until the end of 2017 when Contender Season 0 happened. So there was this like big break of like actual competition. So the only thing I really remember of this time is dying to Raksu with Scatter Arrow over and over and over again in ranked, because that's like really all I really did. And that's another thing that like doesn't really get talked about. Like Hanzo Scatter Arrow, as much as it was very niche, it was so oppressive and so annoying to play against. And like Orisa was one of those characters that, you know, I think Orisa's just not fun to play, and that's why no one really played her, and that's why they kept buffing her, because, like, you know, am I going to play the jumping monkey, or am I going to play the horse that sits behind a shield, like, super far away from the team, right? It was just kind of an awkward time.
Yeah, honorable shout out to the Scatter Arrow. So again, if you think Storm Arrow is bad, I mean, I'm actually not sure anymore what's worse, Storm Arrow or Scatter Arrow, but back then, Scatter Arrow...
It's Scatter Arrow. It's Scatter Arrow without... It took no skill. It was random. You can get double.
Have you seen Storm Arrow, Zach?
No, I have. You actually have to, like. It's not just random. It's not like I have a hatred for Hanzo because of Scatter Arrow. So that's why I'll die on this hill saying Scatter Arrow takes less skill and is way worse than Storm Arrow. I know Storm Arrow's bad. I get it. But Scatter Arrow's by far the worst ability in all of Overwatch. I think the worst ability.
Yeah. I'm being a little bit facetious because I have a little bit of pet peeve for Hanzo. But yeah, you could just kind of aim it roughly at the floor of an Orisa, dead Orisa, just like scatter beneath her feet, scatter, and there that's gone. Lemon, are you back? Can you hear us? No. Well, I can see her mouthing no, but. Maybe we could play charades where Lemon kind of tells us how she feels about stuff, and we'll try and interpret what she's thinking, yay or nay. Yes, she can hear us. Lemon, thoughts on pirate ship? No, mega down. Okay.
Thoughts on Scatter Arrow? Do you like Scatter Arrow?
Yeah.
No, I don't think there's a person alive who likes Scatter Arrow. To be fair. Maybe Raksu.
Yeah. He literally left after Scatter disappeared and everyone started playing Hanzo and Sombra. He literally just stopped playing the game. And it's like, wow, he died with Scatter. I respect it. So
Okay, I picked the right mic this time. Yeah, all that shit.
But it's funny that you bring that up, because of like that time period, like it's basically in between like Apex and all the tournaments and then the actual Overwatch League season, and how the Overwatch League players, like the top really didn't have like that big of a single influence of a meta at the time. Like it was just random, like Pirate Ship or Double or Sniper, whatever worked, and it wasn't until like the first season when we started to see more single metas take over. Like I feel like there was multiple in a given time period because there wasn't the influence of the Overwatch League just yet.
It's kind of like competitive is always like the highest level competitive, less so in 2017, but like ranked is always, or at least in the rank that I played, it has always followed very heavily of what's being played in the competitive scene. Obviously way more in Overwatch League. Like we've had a 6-month break here right now, like in the Overwatch League. I don't know about your ranked games, but it's just chaos at this point. I don't know if Roadhog's meta, Genji's meta, Doomfist is meta, chaos, but I see a lot of it, of everything. And then people are just sort of like giving up on the metas. And that's always happened throughout the time where when there's been less competitive things happening, ranked has just gotten more chaotic in general.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a bane and a curse. I think this is true of all esports, right? Like when there is an esport, people will tend to follow what's being done. I think perhaps the problem that Overwatch has, perhaps singularly, is that it's something that prides itself so much, at least in theory, on diversity, and yet the very nature of Overwatch League kind of mandates that you kind of hard lock something. And I was trying to have a conversation about this with my chat the other day, where it's like, there's not really, the way that Overwatch works is not really a reward for pioneering your own meta. And this is a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's relevant, which is that, you know, let's say there's a dominant meta. Again, I think this is most prominent in GOATs, and we'll talk about in a minute, but let's say there's a really dominant meta and you can spend 2 months practicing GOATs, right? Or you can spend 2 months searching for this new comp. In that time, you're just going to take L after L after L, right? Because you're trying new things. You're like, well, maybe this works, maybe this works, maybe this. You're all this time, you're just taking L's, you're losing. So if there's Overwatch League going on, say goodbye to your season. But on top of that, you're not really perfecting anything. You're just trying stuff. Maybe one of those comps, had you perfected it, would have been able to beat GOATs. But you don't know because you're experimenting. You're looking for this new thing. Let's say you find it after 2 months of hard work. You're like, okay, we found a thing that beats GOATs. What happens? Well, for like 2 weeks, you get to beat everyone who's playing GOATs, after which everyone copies what you did. And now it's back to the same state where everyone's going to start honing that one comp. They're going to keep running that one comp everywhere. And your reward for months of toil will be like a much smaller period where you're the only team who knew this one comp. Because it's very easy to just play that same comp in Overwatch.
So and it's funny they say that. I think a team didn't the Hunters do this with Ball when GOATs was like really prominent, and they were the only team that like had some variation in their comp at that time.
Yeah, and it's actually, I think there's 2 great examples to look at from that 2019 season, because GOATs is the most prominent example, as you said. The Chengdu Hunters were a team that when they had Among, his Wrecking Ball it's kind of like a cheese, and it did catch a couple of teams off, but eventually it just stopped working, and they had a terrible season throughout like the entirety of it. But on the other hand, we have the Shanghai Dragons in the exact same season who were like, we're not very good at GOATs, let's play our own Pharah comp. They played it with Ding on that Pharah. They played it with the Mercy. And they actually went on to win the stage 3 with just like some ridiculous play. And that's like the cost benefit of the 2 things. Like one team completely botched a season. One team won a stage and like beat the San Francisco Shock. But the problem is that you never know what that answer is. As you said, a lot of teams, especially during GOATs, tried to adapt and alter and try all these different things. And it generally meant they came up short, because you're better off just playing the same thing and perfecting it like everyone else and believing in your own ability than trying to find something new.
Are we going to be skipping over the other metas, or are we going to go straight into GOATs? Because I'm sure that's like the most popular meta that every single person has experienced at one point that broke Overwatch as a whole. But I don't want to get too ahead of like your schedule.
we'll definitely get to it. I want to quickly get Lemon's thoughts, because Lemon, from your POV, what do you make of just the general pro levels influence on metas and how you read what we just kind of discussed?
I think there's just so many different like meta climates. Like Open Division plays different than Trials, it plays different than Contenders, it plays different than Owl, and then the regions all have their own style of like, I'd go and cast Korea and it'd be like Zarya Doomfist Dive, and I'd cast NA and we're stuck on double shield for years, even when it gets, bad. So I think everyone has sort of played to their preference and their comforts a lot when it comes, at least in contenders, because it's a little bit like, oh, we might not have the skill to execute like a Doomfist Zarya dive. So then the skill level really plays into what metas are popular in certain like competitive areas of the world. So I think the pros definitely maybe like invent the best meta and the contenders tries to copy it a lot, but sometimes they can't pull it off. So then they do their own thing, which is usually the safest, the less risk as possible, which has been unfortunately double shield a lot.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. And again, while we're tangenting, I think it's a good proponent for why region, like splitting the regions is helpful. So I think this was something that was happening in OWL for a bit as well, where when you had all the Korean talent playing in NA as well, we kind of didn't see a lot of meta diversity. Whereas now that the regions are separate and they only meet for like a periodic tournament, we still see that kind of, Korea will play their dive, NA might play something else, and then we kind of get to see them come together and fight it out. Is that something you've kind of experienced, Custa?
Yeah, well, like absolutely. Like I think that's when especially during 2018 and 2019, I think that's when we hit our most stagnant. And that is exactly the reason you said of in Overwatch League, literally the 12 to 20 best teams in the world were all playing and scrimming each other. So everyone came to the same conclusion. But because we're all scrimming and practicing in different regions, like even right now, if you look at the ranked leaderboards of the Asian region, the tanks are all Winston and Zarya. But if you look at the North American one, it's all Wrecking Ball and Sigma. And that's because we play very, very different styles right now. And I think this, well, I guess we're going into Overwatch 2. It would have been very interesting to see what would have come out on top over time if the two regions hadn't met. Would Double Bubble have been stronger, or would the slower style that the West likes to play, or Brawl, have sort of taken the cake in this meta?
Yeah, Zach, any sort of thoughts on that before we do move on to some of the other metas that came just before GOATS?
I guess I don't have a good enough opinion to talk about like pro influence, because at this time I didn't really like see a lot of it too much. I mean, as terms of a viewer, yeah, I guess a more competitive casual person, I would look for like the pros as their influence on what would be good to play, and then just go based off of that. And then when that doesn't happen, then it's like, okay, then we're just going to play whatever we want to play. Then it's like, if we're not going to follow a strict meta, then just play whatever you want to play. So,
and that is relevant to mention, which, we're talking about metas. Of course, the higher you go, the more entrenched it becomes, right? For the majority of this, that's why I like name checking stuff like the shield generator, because even if that never really made it to a dominant sphere at the pro level, I could tell you it ruined a lot of ladder games, and especially in the, in the medal ranks and stuff. So it is relevant to mention that, maybe not all of you experience a lot of these metas in your games per se. You might experience something completely different where some broken thing just dominated. And speaking of broken things, I want to quickly shout out the damage boost on the Hanzo Dragon. That was a meta for a while, which was, again, for those of you who don't know, Mercy could damage boost a Hanzo while he was ulting. And this resulted in the grab dragon boost. Yeah, it was a whole meta for a while, I think, at the Overwatch League level, where you pick Hanzo, you pick Zarya, grab dragon, Mercy right clicks, and now Transcendence is useless.
Yep. It was the good times. it was one of those times where it's just like it was one of those like checkmate cards where it's like these days, like there's always like counterplay, there's always something else you can do to deal with it. But like especially like divas weren't as good at eating dragons as they are now. But like it was just you couldn't do anything about it. If you got caught in the grab, it was over. And one of those very, very oppressive times.
It was a tough casting meta too. I know I'm always on the casting grab, but it translates also to how fun it is to watch when how fun is it to cast is at least the comparison I like to make. And it was tough because back then I was still learning how to cast, and it was like you'd have these grab dragons happen every single time, and you're like, well, how hype am I supposed to get? Is this exciting that I've had the 5th grab dragon of this map? Like at this point, do we give a shit? And it was a weird time because then you could tell the cast got bored, viewers got bored of like the same fights. It's like this team had it, they moved 5 feet forward. Then all the other team have it, now we have a hold. And I guess it kind of plays the same as like GOATs of like, okay, we throw grab, we win fight. And yeah, it was kind of lame.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then one of the few occasions where the dev stepped in and nerfed one very particular interaction, which was that, now Mercy can no longer damage boost a Hanzo Dragon, which is, yeah, that's why. If you ever wonder why is that a thing? Well, this is why. Okay, another couple things to check off. Hackfist, the famous, I think, World Cup Canada strat where they were running Sombra Doomfist. Lemon, you might remember this more vividly than others.
I don't want to remember Team Canada. I'm sorry. Can I go next question, please?
No comment. Okay.
You
so
remember when XQC skipped out on Team Canada matches to go and play Overwatch 2? Team Canada remembers. There's a lot of bad memories just around Team Canada, but that was actually after, I think, the Hackfist. I'm not sure, but yeah, we don't talk about that.
Okay, I will promptly skip forward.
It's okay, you can keep going. This is like therapy.
From the Hackfist to the one tank. This is again when Wrecking Ball gets introduced to the game. We start to see a lot of one tank, 3 DPS. I mean, we saw a lot of 3 DPS one tanks anyways, but I think doubly so with Wrecking Ball. You start to see a lot of Wrecking Ball as your one tank, if you can even call him that, and then everyone just piss off across the map kind of thing. Any thoughts on that?
Lucio Moira? Like, I'm trying to remember who the supports were in that triple DPS. Like, I don't remember it too
I don't remember that one either.
I can't remember. I feel like it was Mercy Zen, but I could be wrong. It could be.
Yeah.
To be fair, Lucio was so dominant for so long. Again, for those who now, you might be like, Lucio, throw pick. But for the first 3 years of Overwatch, Lucio was a literal must pick. Like, you had to have a Lucio specialist. It was just a must pick.
Yeah, there wasn't like a lot of depth in the support lineup. And Lucio's utility of the speed and the fact that it used to, like, think about how big your speed boost and healing warrior is now. It used to be literally double that, I'm pretty sure. Like, it was just enormous, so you could just do whatever you wanted. And like that's how Lucio was played. And yeah, like I would just assume it would be Lucio. There was like so many, like, we think back and it was like, oh yeah, Lucio Mercy comps and Lucio Zen comps. And you think back, and if you think about it now, you're like, that is such a throw. But that's how it was back in the day, because a lot of these characters were a lot more oppressive than they are now.
Yeah, and of course we didn't really have mass healing back then. I mean, even when Nano's released, her nade is the only form of like mass AoE healing. Obviously Lucio amp as well, but again, that it's not that much, and he has to sacrifice speed for it. It's only later that we get the Moira and the BAP, and now we're getting, and Brig, a lot of mass healing. So that's when you would, before then you wouldn't, I guess we just weren't used to that much amounts of healing, right? You kind of dealt with one single target orb and a Mercy beam, and that was kind of like, that was your healing. So it's interesting to know, like you said, like original dive was Zen Lucio. And it's like now you'd be like, does that not feel a bit weak, guys?
Are we sure about this? Are we absolutely sure?
Winston's like, I don't feel like I'm getting healed. Yeah, and you're just like, it's because you're not.
Exactly. Okay, well, let's move on then to perhaps Zach's favorite here that Zach has been dying to talk about. And I think what will probably deserve the most time on this podcast, rightly so, the most singularly dominant meta ever in Overwatch, GOATs. Zach? Goats. Give me your thoughts.
So, GOATs first started off from either Runaways, or I think they popularized it, and then it was like from a team actually called GOATs. And it was basically 3 tanks, 3 supports. You had Reinhardt, Diva, Zarya, and Zenyatta, Lucio, and Brigitte. There was really no variation. Maybe Zenyatta for Moira, if I do remember. Well, but what was that?
Sorry, I was just gonna say the original was Moira. It's only when they started mirroring that they switched the Moira out for Zen. If I'm remembering correctly, because if you were facing a non-GOATs team, you needed the mass heal of the Moira, and then eventually, when everyone mirrored it, they switched the Moira for the Zen. If I remember.
Yeah, either way, you had 7 heroes that you had to play, and that's frustrating when somebody else does it because your whole team needs to do it. And that either way, it pushed out DPS players just out of the way. And I think the roughest part about this meta is it lasted so long. Like, you look at some of these metas, you don't even remember, like, I don't remember Double Shield, Pirate Ship, like, it's still popular, but it's not like as oppressive. GOATs was a full like year. It took over the whole entire, was it the 2nd season, Custa and Lemon? Like 3rd season, I don't, whatever the Shock one, I think it was their first. And it just, everyone hated it. Like, people, I'm surprised at how many people think of it so fondly now. I went to the first opening day of the 2nd Overwatch League, so it was the 2nd season, and people were like booing when they saw GOATs. People hated this meta, so that's why I'm like, Overwatch players look so fondly through rose-tinted glasses at metas that they don't even remember how terrible they really were. And GOATs is a prime example of like, this was this was the lowest of lows of Overwatch. Like people were like Shroud were deeming goats was like a terrible meta. And it was all just due to one hero too. It was literally right after Brig got added, and then it's like all everything just fell after that.
I'm gonna let Lemon take it because I know Custa's gonna have a lot of thoughts about goats.
Oh, God.
Yeah, you go
I'm gonna
first,
take it
Lemon.
to
I'm
Lemon
gonna need
first.
some minutes, some time.
I feel like I was like primered a bit for goats because like right before like goats hit contenders, there was 4 tank to support, and it was like last night's leftovers or some shit, or a bye week. Like one of those like teams just like came up with it, or I don't know. That was like the first time I saw it. It was 4 tanks, 2 supports, and it was horrible because nothing died. But then when we went into goats, I really liked certain versions. I liked that there were so many kind of cute little variations. There was like the Snoats with the May or whatever the fuck, and then there was like the Sombra goats, the Soats, and then there was that variation. They were all like, I liked the Sombra goats the most for sure because of that. You know, there was a win condition, like there was a guaranteed fight win if you had that EMP. Basically, you just had to have a brain cell to do it. And then if people ran Ana goats, that's where I thought at least it gave us more hype options, because then you could nano the Rein, you could bio, if you could bio the team and fuck over the D.Va and the Rein, then that was a fight win. So Ana kind of gave more layers of win conditions, but sometimes people wouldn't run Ana because she's, you know, I don't know. There were some people that liked it, some people that didn't. But yeah, when people didn't run Ana, then it was just the Grav and then maybe a self-destruct. Barely any shatters were really going through, but sometimes those were cool. But casting, viewer-wise, it was great to watch because it was very easy to watch. You had 12 people collide in one little thing, and it took like a good type of caster to be able to really break down the micro things that were happening within that giant clump. So I know the color casters liked it, although the not so good color casters really struggled. If you weren't able to identify those micro things, you were really just casting the same thing. And that's when I think it really did get monotonous. I personally liked it for 70% of the time because of the hype factor, because it was easy to cast, easy to watch, and easy to break down. But yeah, I do agree with everyone that, you know, a year is still too long of anything, really, no matter how fun it was to play.
Was it really actually hype to see not only the same ultimates, but also just sustainability? Like, no, like Custa kind of, I think, alluded to it. Nobody would die. Like, no, like you would go in and just nobody, you would have the Brig ult, then Lucio, then Transcendence. And by that point, Brig was probably already halfway to another ultimate, another Brig. It's just like, I don't know, as terms of a caster's perspective of how exciting it could be. I mean, you obviously casted a lot, so your word is obviously like true, but it's just wild to think that goats could be exciting given the comp, and it was just really the sustainability that was just so rough.
There was like a lot of micro interactions that made it kind of hype. Like if a Grav was thrown, did the D.Va eat it? Does she have full matrix? Does she have self-destruct? And it's like once you got into like the little micro things, I found it interesting because there were some differences between a good goats team and not. And then like I said, when the Ana was thrown in, I think that some teams picked up the Ana as one of the supports, and then that kind of helped speed some fights along with the bio grenade kind of stopping some of the sustain. But I just like brawl, and that was one of the like funnest brawls. But like I said, like just any meta that's lasting like a year is just gonna be trash to eventually cast. Just saying the same thing over and over, it does get monotonous. But
it's funny that you say that from like a caster's perspective, but also like if you look at it from a tank main's perspective, they probably love goats. Supports, they probably love goats. DPS.
Custa shaking
I mean, obviously other, like, I can't speak on like support and tanks, but DPS players hated it because they couldn't kill anything and they weren't welcomed. Like, it's like, what are you doing picking Genji, picking Soldier? Even when May was picked, it's like, yeah, like it could work, but hey, that Zarya, like you should pick that Zarya instead.
Playing it sucks. I mean, was in SVB Pugs, maybe. I think we played like some goats like custom, and I played D.Va, and I was like, oh my god, I hate playing D.Va and goats. This is horrendous. You can't like flank or do anything. You can't like really extend and finish off kills because there's 3 supports, and just so I can imagine playing it just being horrendous in terms of like having any freedom to do anything but hug your friends on your team.
which is nice. A very wholesome approach.
Yeah.
I'm letting Custa just stew and rub his hands and get ready to end this
Yeah,
whole man's
I'm
career.
interested to hear like from a pro and support player's perspective of all this.
It's really interesting hearing both your perspectives of like a caster and also someone who's like competitive, but also not at the highest level, right? So like it's interesting hearing your takes. Personally, like I completely agree. What if GOATs had been lasted for 6 months? I think a lot of people would look back and be like, this was a really interesting time of the game. But the fact that it lasted, because it was about the 2018 World Cup was like the first rumblings that everyone's just going to start playing GOATs. And then we got to 2019 and we played it for 3 stages. It really jades a lot of people. The frustrations that I have with GOATs is like, you get the fans who are like, oh yes, I love GOATs. It was the most smart time of Overwatch that we've ever played. Yes.
Hey, why are these fans British? What's up with this?
I'm sorry, I'm just thinking of Sideshow in my mind. It all came out. But it's like, yes, it was the most complex and the most lucrative way the game was played ever. Like it got broken down. Everyone was fighting for that extra 1% of value. Everyone was playing the same thing. So everyone's value was amplified over and over and over again, which was really interesting and was really cool. The thing that people like seem to forget, and I went through this like trip recently of like, when I watched Shock vs Vancouver Titans, yeah, that was some great Overwatch. There was some great moments. There was hype times. I also watched Washington Justice face the London Spitfire, and it was like, if I would rather just like slam my head on the desk over and over again rather than watch that, because bad GOATs was really unfun. And I think when you look at the community and the game as a whole, that is when we lost the most amount of players, because it was just awful. First of all, if you didn't play GOATs and you played against GOATs, you almost instantaneously lost the game. There wasn't counterplay. There wasn't these things. The composition of GOATs at the base level was very easy to play. Just stick around to 6 people and just walk at the opposition, and it was very hard to deal with. But then once you even once you mirrored GOATs, it wasn't really a fun experience unless you were playing at a competitive level and you were scrimming and you had a great 6 players to play with and you were learning from that. I feel like a lot of people just like, all of a sudden your Reinhardt pins into the opposition and he just dies. It's like, well, that's not how you play GOATs. And it was just very unfun to play in those situations. And like DPS players just wanted to stop playing the game. All of a sudden your Brig switches to Widow and you're like, well, we just lost the game again. There's so many negative interactions that I think a lot of people forget about this time. And they just remember the great times of the Shock vs Vancouver Titans. As I said, GOATs was cool as a player. Obviously, my personal career didn't do great in GOATs, but I still had fun playing, and I think it was a really interesting time just sort of breaking down and learning from the game and learning from other players. But it is still a massive black spot in Overwatch 1 history that I think too many people look through with rose-colored glasses.
Yes. There's a reason why roll queue came out. Like there's a good reason why, and there's a good reason why a lot of people left during this time. But like, it makes me also wonder, like, what's the better kind of meta? Like a singular meta hero, like Mercy and the Moth meta, or a 6 or 7 person meta? I think of GOATs, and it's like, I hate that. I'd rather just have one person be meta, and then everyone else can be free to play whoever,
Then 11 people could be mad at that one thing. It's like, you. No, I mean, it's so fascinating. I really do want to pause because I think this is such an interesting topic. I think we could probably have an entire podcast on GOATs and its effect itself. I think there's so many nuances to what makes it so singularly fascinating. And I think one of the things you guys touched on is that kind of discrepancy between pro level and the average player. Because I think a lot of people, and I think one interesting thing why people remember it so fondly might just be survivor's bias, right? Because the people who didn't like GOATs left and never came back, is my guess. So the people who stuck around are the people who clearly enjoyed GOATs at least enough that they didn't bugger off and are still here to this day. So I wonder if that's part of it. Nostalgia, like you said, is another part of it. But speaking just on a regular ladder level, I never really saw people play GOATs in my ladder games, which is one of the most fascinating things, right? I don't know if this is an EU diff. I don't know what it was like in NA. I don't know what it was like in other regions. I could never convince people to play GOATs. And back then I was actually still in GM back then. So I could never convince people to lock GOATs. Like I would beg them. But that, again, maybe it's the case that there's too many DPS players in ladder and they didn't want to, lock 3 tanks and 3 supports. But I'd be like, please guys, it's a win. We'll just clump up and we'll push. It's a win. And people just never did it. And yet at the pro level, it was so dominant. So
I guess maybe
Go ahead. No, go ahead. I was going to say, from a ladder perspective.
I guess maybe it just came down to like just Brig being so powerful too. Like once you saw Brig, it's like, okay, well maybe we should play maybe 3 tanks, and then it slowly turned into goats. And I remember even my rank games, a lot of it being determined based on goats, and just it slowly transforming into 3-3, and it just overall it just wasn't fun, and I saw it a lot in my rank games.
It was a fun, like, when Sombra Goats was, like, a thing. I don't know if this ever went to overall. I was kind of only in my contenders bubble at the time, but it was actually kind of cool to just see, like, this Sombra player versus this Sombra player, and then all the supports, like, how are they able to ult track the EMP, and are they able to hide from the EMP, and it just, like, all the variations of Goats that came in also added, like, a fun extra layer. Like, are they going for Goats? Are they going for Mei Goats? Are they going for Sombra Goats? And then the way you play around Sombra Goats had more layers to it. So honestly, maybe I was just begging for any kind of variation or any kind of ingenuity around it, but
no, I do think it's a really good point.
I miss the metas that are easy to watch, you know?
Yeah.
No, I think it's a really good point, because I think that's another area of fascination that I would love to kind of dwell on as well. Is at the start it was very samey, right? It was just like these 6 characters over and over and over. But right towards the end, which is kind of funny because it's just as they started to vary, just as we started to see Sombra Goats and Ana Goats and even Bap Goats came in for a little bit of time as well, it became fascinating, because in a way we kind of accepted that this was how Overwatch was played. In many ways, Overwatch has never had one singular thing, right? Like, Overwatch changes so drastically from meta to meta based on, like you said, Zach, like if one thing is suddenly broken, like hide and seek Mercy is a completely different way of playing Overwatch than what Goats was, and then completely different to what Double Shield is, and completely different again to what Dive is, and completely different again to what Poke is, right? If you compare it to like a MOBA game is roughly the same game no matter what 6 heroes or 5 heroes you pick, right? The mechanics of the game work the same way. Whereas Overwatch has varied very drastically based on what heroes are strong and not. Whereas Goats was like this one period of time where we just agreed that this is Overwatch now, at least at the pro level. Or this is it. You pick like 6 to 7 characters and you kind of death ball and you run at each other. And that's when we really started to see people trying to pick at these nuances of like, if we add an Ana and we can get a nade off, that's like an insta fight win. But then they've got a D.Va, and if she eats it, then our Ana's completely like a dead weight. Why wouldn't we just have a Zen anyways, which has Discord permanent value? So like, it was very fascinating in a way that we were seeing this sort of chess match iteration on this comp that was so dominant for a while. But yeah, like you said, go ahead, Custa.
No, like I just wanted to like reinforce your point. Like I think that's a really good point of like, it was like, this is the way it is. We can tweak some things here and there, but like this is how it is. And I think one of the big frustrations from the higher competitive teams is that if you weren't good at goats, what do you do? Like I remember you just lose. And that was the reality for a bunch of these teams in the Overwatch League of like, I have a really vivid memory of like stage 2, we're going up against the Chengdu Hunters. And we were really nervous of like, what are they going to do? Like, are they going to throw Farah at us? They're going to throw Wrecking Ball, all that kind of stuff. And I remember we get their starting roster and they're playing Karyan, who was their Reinhardt main tank when they played Goats. And we like instantly in that moment is like, we're a better Goats than Chengdu Hunters. We just won the game. Doesn't even matter. I don't even care what's about to happen in the lobby. We know we're better than them. We're going to beat them. And that's how it was when we played against the San Francisco Shock in that stage. I think it was stage 2 finals of like, well, we lost. Like it was like we tried everything. We tried variations in that game. We tried playing Warrior Goats. We tried playing Bap Goats. We tried playing Sombra Goats. We tried playing regular Goats. They were just a better Goats team than us. And there was very little individual pop-off potential that would be able to heavily offset that. And that is something that I think Goats heavily missed, is that players could be dominant, but you needed to be consistently dominant rather than just having your Widow get 4 kills or one of your like supports just pops off randomly and gets a couple of kills. That is what the game of Goats missed. And that's why a lot of people really didn't enjoy watching it, because the hype moments came from massive macro decisions that happened over multiple decisions of like the 3K D.Va bomb out of the Grav was a result of they forced the Transcendence early and then the beat had to come out to cover the Graviton. And then all of a sudden the Lucio gets a great boop and that results in the 3K. That's very hard for a casual viewer to digest and understand, and also to be explained. from a casting perspective. I'm sure LemonKiwi can sort of like hit on that more than I could.
And there was even like the decision of, do you beat engage too? Because I remember a bunch of analysts came out at the time of like, is it better to beat engage or to save beat to counter grab? Because like, do you take the early fight initiative or like whatever? And there were so many like little decisions that teams had to make, and everyone had their own style. But speaking of that style, I think it forced like the difference between a good Rein and a bad Rein. Like if you had one team who just had a mediocre ass Rein, it like really make or break that Goats team. But then it was like after Goats where all the Reins had to be aggressive and just brain dead, just run in W key, do whatever. Because you had 3 supports and you needed to be that aggressive in Goats. You know, a measured approach, but still aggressive. But when Goats went away, then you had all these Reinhardts who were used to Goats going in. Like I'm thinking of like Gig or just other Reinhardts that at the time in contenders that just needed so much resources because I think they were so used to Goats and having a very aggressive style from Goats that when it came to not Goats or 222 or whatever, you had a lot of feedy ass Reins and contenders of just going a little too deep and not really putting up that shield too much. So I think it was a big wake up call, and a lot of, I know Reinhardt's struggled and kind of got kicked from teams from just kind of being a little too difficult to play with, you know?
Going a little bit too bumper, one might say. Zach, any sort of thoughts on that as well? What Lemon just spoke about. I mean, I know you're not just not a fan.
Yeah, no, no, like it's good points. Like, I mean, it's very like, I mean, Overwatch is hard to. It's one of the hardest esports to watch. But in Goats, it's kind of a little bit more easier because you don't have tracers flanking, you don't have Pharahs flying and whatnot. But I think just from a viewer's perspective, I think one interesting part about esports and Overwatch specifically is that it's always changing. Like every single season, it's different. Where we saw Genji or where we see Bastion or whatever the case may be. So to have a time period where it was just the same from a viewer's perspective, it's like, okay, well, I've seen this a million times. Like I don't want to watch this. Like I can turn on Overwatch League at any time. I'll see the same 6-7 heroes, and it was just not a very fun time to not see any variations, just plain and simple. And I know like there can be analytical and lots of fun nuances of it. But from just a casual perspective, I see the same 6 heroes. I don't want to watch that, you know.
100%. I think there's one thing that most Overwatch fans can agree on. It's like meta staleness is just not something they want. And I think another vivid example that I have, like Custa had, was the Houston Outlaws fiasco, as I will dub it, in the whole Goats meta. And for those who don't maybe remember, there was this whole Houston Outlaws have always been a very popular Overwatch League team, and that means they have very vocal Western fans. And there was this period where they were running, during Goats, they were running like a Sombra based comp, I think it was, and they were finding moderate success against some of the lesser teams, let's put it, that way. And I think they were having a game against the San Francisco Shock. I think this is where the controversy came. It was one of the better teams. I can't remember exact details, but they were running a game against one of the better teams, and they decided to just mirror the Goats. And afterwards, they lost badly. And afterwards, their fans just chastised them. They're all over social media. Why didn't you guys run the Sombra? Clearly, you guys can run Sombra. Why not try it? I mean, you've been trying Goats and failing. Why not try the Sombra? And this was like a big thing, because I remember a couple of the Houston Outlaws players came out and they were like, you guys are clueless in more polite. Some of them more politely, some of them less politely. You guys are clueless. You don't know what you're talking about. We have to mirror the Goats or we will lose. It's just not possible. You guys are talking out of your behinds. And I think that was kind of the nail in the coffin of like,
it's just how it is. Like, this is Overwatch.
Like, we just can't not do it.
Speaking from a player who's like been on teams that have gone catastrophically, like the Dallas Fuel, like people love to armchair, analyst and be like, oh, we saw you have this success. Like the real answer of that is that Sombra Goats didn't work against the San Francisco Shock because they knew how to play the Baptiste Goats and they were the best team in the world at dealing with it. The Houston Outlaws recognize that and they know that they can't take it to them. They have a better shot of just trying to mirror and hope something goes right for them. But then that chastisement, as you said, of the fans, it becomes like very difficult. And because of how long Goats meta lasted, there were a lot of people who were like, oh yes, I've solved Goats. Let me fix all your problems for you real quick. You should play Mei. And it's like, but they don't understand the interactions. And you need to remember that Overwatch League teams, they were spending at least 4 to 6 hours a day, every day of playing Goats and having multiple discussions, review sessions, playing against the best teams in the world, against all the teams in the world. Everyone knew what the pecking order was for Goats and understanding of what would work and what was the best kind of adjustments. And that's why, as you said, a team that's struggling to have success with GOATs, it's very hard when you hear fans being very vocal and negative towards your player.
Well, eventually, after much outcry, Blizzard stepped in and with a very I mean, they tried, again, this is the power creep era. They tried a lot of small changes, by the way, guys. For those who weren't around, lots of little things got tweaked, which eventually bit us in the ass when roll luck comes in. But things like, Reaper buffs, Mei multi-freeze, Orisa buffs, like all of these things came as a potential answer to GOATs. Never did. But then 222 comes out. We introduce roll luck. And thus is born the next trigger point of the community, Double Shield. So, who wants to take Double Shield first? Anyone really psyched to talk about Double Shield?
I know I'm probably with the minority here of liking it, but it's just because I'm
don't
biased.
say it. Zach, don't say you like Double Shield.
So Double Shield, if I remember correctly, it was Sigma, Orisa, Mei, Reaper. Was it not? Like, was that the meta? Like
it was
Doom Reaper as well.
Doom Reaper, yeah, as well.
Okay, so I remember it being Mei Reaper, and like I got a shrine of Mei right there. Mei's my favorite hero. I got to GM in the open queue beta, and it's just because Mei was very effective. This was at a time, and like I'm biased. Like I 100%, I admit I'm biased towards it. I liked it because of the Mei, but I'm sure that's why a lot of people also like GOATs because they play tank and whatnot. And but it was also fun just because we got DPS, whether you liked it or not. We got DPS back in the game, and you had to play it. So even if you didn't want to play Reaper Mei or Reaper Doomfist, you could still play your DPS because somebody has to play DPS now. So that's why I like it. But I understand. But I also hate Double Shield later on because I'm just shooting blue shields. I'm not getting kills. And that was always the funnest part about Overwatch was getting kills, not even shooting the tanks anymore.
You don't have to.
And I was also good at and I was also good at Orisa too. And that's also how I got to GM was with Orisa. And she was finally good, but because of like Sigma getting added and along with like Rollock. So that's just, I know I'm biased and my opinion is probably not of the majority, and other people can have more stable opinions on Double Shield than me.
No, I just wanted to emphasize, don't apologize. And as much as we all want to be objective, we're all players too. So at the end of the day, when our main gets nerfed, we mauled. When we can play hide and seek, Mercy, and Res 5 people, we love it. So it's all it's all in the by and by. Lemon, what was your kind of opinion when when Rollock comes in and you start to see the Sigma introduction as well?
For Double Shield, I think it depends how it's played. I think like dumb teams or just like boring teams just like stack it back to back. But what I liked about Double Shield, at least if I did like Double Shield at some point, is when the Sigma would take an off angle and then bring some kind of like range DPS with them. He had like a Sigma Brig and Hanzo at one angle and then like Orisa at the other. I think that created some interesting pushes and some interesting just fight dynamics of, okay, which part of which shield setup do you want to push? Because then you would have these 3-3 splits, and then the 6 stack, the other team would then could 6v3 one of the things, and then it forced kind of these decisions. And I thought like if the double shield were split, it was fun. But then it also depend on like what DPS were being run, because then if it was double shield, double sniper, then that was really monotonous, because then you're just sitting there hoping the snipers are gonna get an angle and the tanks aren't doing anything because they're just shooting each other at a distance. Then there's the double shield Bastion, where that was absolutely horrible, because as a caster, there's only so many ways I can say Bastion is shooting a shield, Bastion is shooting people, Bastion is shooting a shield. And it was so awful because it was basically like, how good were you at shield management? And I'm in the metal ranks, and it's not that horrible to do at like any level, to just have some brain cell to LOS and then that. But then, so Bastion just shredding shields in 0.5 was just really boring. So it really depends for double shield. I know this was a longer answer, but it depends what DPS were being used and how the shields are being set up. I liked it when I was split. I don't like it when it's stacked.
Custa, what was your personal kind of, when, because you were there, you hear the Rollock is coming in. Some of you guys leaked it, but what was your,
Yeah.
Was this your last season in the Overwatch League, Custa?
Yes. Yeah, so this was my last season in the Overwatch League, and it was actually interesting because I was like, I knew I was going to retire. About halfway through 2019, I was like, I'm pretty sure I'm going to retire at the end of this year. But there was this really interesting transition of like, people always like, like to look back at the GOATS era and be like, oh, you know, people were starting to work out in stage 3, like how to beat GOATS. The reality is that wasn't true. What happened is at the beginning of stage 3, the Blizzard, they went and had people talk to every single team. And they were like, do you think 222 should be implemented? All that kind of stuff. And they actually told all the teams at the end of stage 3, 222 is coming into the game. So a lot of people were just like, screw learning GOATS. We're just going to go all in on trying to be as good as we can and get as many wins as we can. That's why there was so much chaos in that stage. But I actually forgot because I didn't really watch. I don't remember the playoffs of 2019 season, but it was double shield, but it was a very weird style of double shield. It was like Lucio Moira double shield Reaper Doom. And it created this like kind of like pseudo GOATS. It was kind of like everyone was like, oh, GOATS is so strong. Let's just find the thing that replicates that the most. And that's what this ended up being. And it actually was like the same level of boring, if not worse, because it didn't have as many cool tank interactions, because the DPS was just like, does the Doomfist or Reaper kill anyone? So I really didn't like this part, especially on top of what LemonKiwi said of like, I watched recently a Bastion with a Orisa shield in front of them and a Sigma shield behind them on the top of Horizon Lunar Colony, and watching the poor team try and run up those stairs, but then they get pulled and someone dies, so they got to wait 30 seconds, and then the next person gets picked for some random reason, and then we got to wait another 30 seconds. It was a really bad time of Overwatch, especially coming out of GOATS, because that should have been the moment where everyone's like, we're free, but it really wasn't. It because of that power creep. And that's a great point, SVP. Like, they buffed so many heroes to try and counter GOATS that when we came out of GOATS, there were a couple of heroes that were just like way overtuned for these kind of situations, and it took them a while to pull back on that. So I prefer this double shield than to like the current double shield, which is kind of like Baptiste Zen double shield, double sniper, where, as LemonKiwi said, is a support and a tank. You're just sort of standing there shooting shields and then hoping something dies at some point.
Something happens.
Yeah, something happens at some point. It's not going to be me who does anything. Maybe I'll die, but you know, I'm not going to be able to do anything. And I think that's the negative part of double shield, and why so many people like to think like, oh, maybe 222 was bad for the game just because of double shield.
Yeah, I think it's one of these like consequences that, again, the ramifications of pro play is that pro players tend to find or like things that are comfortable in that sense, right? If they've been grinding GOATS for a year, when GOATS is removed, they're like you said, what can we find that's like kind of like GOATS, and we can continue the same principles. And I think we kind of see this a lot when metas shift. At least from my POV, again, I'm not a pro player, so maybe you know, Custa, you have a close interaction, you'd have a different take, and maybe Lemon and Zach, you guys have a different take. But it feels like when one meta dies, pros try to find like what's the closest kind of way we can play that's kind of like that. And I think this was it, where again, so much context we have to remember. This is back when Orisa had the Giga Shield and Giga Halt. So, you know, and I remember the reason they picked Reaper and Doomfist, because they were like things that could go through the shields, right? The Doomfist would just punch, they'd wait for the Halt, the Halt would come in, the Doomfist would just punch the Halt, the Reaper would TP into the back line, he'd try and kill something, then Wraith out, and then the Moira Coalescence was the only way you could actually go through the shield. So it was like all based around circumventing these fat shields. So like you said, what should have been a moment for DPS mains like Zach to rejoice and say, finally I can go get kills again, it was just, well, actually, no, it's just these things in front of us. But there's one thing I want to mention in this. This was the pulled pork meta, which some of you might remember, which is as a consequence of as a consequence of the Orisa Halt being much bigger than it is now, you could hold people over the top of an Orisa shield and then yoink them with a hog hook, and that was just a free pick on, you know, the 8-second cooldown, whatever it was. And Zach, you loved it seemingly.
Well, I mean, like, it was just a funny, goofy meta, but it also was just a BS meta. Like, I don't have too many opinions about it because I don't think this lived for that long, if I do remember. Because I think this is when they started really nerf, like, Orisa, like, with her shield and then her pull and whatnot. But it was just goofy fun. But again, it was just, I mean, it was so easy, and then you had to wait for the Orisa haul. I mean, Fortify, just, I don't have much opinions about it other than just it was goofy.
Lemon?
Yeah, I hated it viewing and casting wise, because anything that is pick based, so any double sniper or halt hook kind of plays in that same how the energy level goes, where it's like and then because it's like the halt and the hook misses, or halt up misses the timing, or halt and there's a shield there, and it's a fortify, and it was like this you're just being edged like the whole time, and then you're there's a halt and nothing's happening. And then you would have that hook, and it's like, okay, shit's hitting the fan. The hook worked. Okay, you got your pick. Now let's start running at them, or something's gonna happen. But it's just that like tease that you get where both teams are looking at each other, spraying their shields down, whatever, waiting 6 seconds or whatever the fuck for the halt to be online and the hook to sync up, and then you're just waiting for the first pick. And as a caster, it's like, especially as play-by-play, I always have to like just be on the edge of, is it gonna happen or not? And I don't like. And it was just, at least at the contenders level too, what the execution wasn't perfect. So you're just kind of bored. And like, it could be 100% hype, could be amazing, or it could be 0% hype and nothing happening. And I really didn't like that, just any pick meta, which that was part of it.
Custa?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with what they said. Like Orisa Hog, like the pulled pork, I don't think it's ever been like a hard meta, but it's just always existed ever since Orisa has been in the game. Like there's always been that moment. And as you said, it's my biggest frustrations with any meta of any situation is when the interactions of very few heroes are the things that determine the success of a team, right? So your two tanks, if you were playing on a pull pork meta, you're playing Orisa Hog versus Orisa Hog. If your Hog just keeps getting pulled every time, it's like, I can't help you in any way to stop that from happening. And then we also can't counter that. So it's like, it feels like you just have no control. And the sad reality of these like heavy pulled pork metas was that it wasn't like, oh, you get one hook pull and then you're like, oh, then they run into the opposition team, wheel press ult. It's like, no, they get the one pull hook and then they take a little bit of space and then they wait 8 seconds and then they pull again and then they walk forward a little bit and they pull again. And that's just like the never ending cycle of like, it just dominates it. But it's just, I think it's because in that meta, there were no interesting ultimates as well. Like you usually had a Widow with it. You have Orisa Hog, which are damage ones, but don't really have like team fight implications. And I felt that was like consistent. It never really felt like you were getting these big moments and these hype moments from those from that meta. So not a very interesting one for me.
No. And actually, speaking of pick base, I just realized looking back at the list that there was one very key meta I missed mentioning. And I think Custa will have fond memories of the Moth Mercy meta.
I was going to bring it up actually.
We spoke about the 5-man res, and in my repressed memories, I forgot for a second that when they removed the 5-man res, they gave Mercy Valkyrie. Again, for those of you who weren't around, when they first rejigged Valkyrie, essentially they gave Mercy her resurrect on a cooldown. It was instant back then, and she essentially got like a reset, like a res reset when she got Valkyrie. So she would res, press Valkyrie, get res again, and it would speed up, if I remember correctly, the cooldown of her next res. So it was like you could get something
it was 10
like
seconds, I think.
Yeah, something like. Go ahead, Zach.
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you. I'm so sorry, but I remember this vividly, like, because this is when like my YouTube channel was finally coming to fruition. I was covering like all kinds of changes, and that was it was not only just broken, but also I remember on the PTR, Mercy being the best DPS hero. You would nano the Mercy, you would activate your Valk, and you would just go and shoot because you had infinite ammo, and you just were unkillable. So, but then they changed the damage portion. But like you said, before I interrupt you, I apologize for that. Yeah, you would just you would res, activate your ultimate, and then res again instantaneous. So it's almost as if it was like a mini 5-man res, but just still like, just a little less powerful.
It was like we went to 9v9 Highlander all of a sudden. Like that's what it felt like, because what this essentially allowed you to do is get 3 resurrections within 10 seconds every time you popped back. But then on top of that, I think you could res someone every 30 seconds. So picks became almost irrelevant in a way. And when it first came in, people didn't really understand the power of it. Like in stage 1, it wasn't really played that. So we're going into 2018 Overwatch League for context of where we are, because at the beginning in stage 1, rumblings of Mercy were played here and there, but after that, Mercy pretty much dominated the meta. And like the reason, like, obviously it was very good for me. This is really how I made my name as a player, and like the success that we had with the Los Angeles Valiant of like, I got traded to the Valiant halfway through the season, and Mercy was just a must pick. You played Mercy for the rest of that season because of how strong those reses are. It got nerfed a little bit down the line of that season, and more in line with where Mercy is now. But at the beginning, is like you would just instantly double res, and it just became this massive, like almost pick meta where, because you couldn't kill everyone at once, it became of like you were just trying to kill everyone 9 times. And, there was just constant res and that kind of stuff. And also, the Mercy dying was like the worst thing that could happen in the game. If your Mercy died, the fight was over. because of how much healing she did back then as well. So Moth meta was another case, and I hope Blizzard learns from this mistake. And I think this is something that I can actually put into 222, is that it felt like Blizzard in historic times, they felt like they had to massively put power into these heroes to get them to be played, but it was impossible to understand how the interactions of buffing one hero would have an adverse effect across everything else. And that's what Brig did. Brig was introduced into the game to counter dive, to stop these Winston Traces from just running amok all the time and always playing dive. What they didn't anticipate was that if you then pair that Brig with 2 other healers and 3 tanks, it becomes massively oppressive. So 222 allows Blizzard to balance their game more aggressively and sort of deal with power creep without just making heroes redundant or overpowered. And I think that's something that, obviously we lost a lot of ingenuity with 222, but I think it just makes the game balanceable. And a lot of people say, Blizzard, just balance your game. I think it was impossible. Until 222 came into this game, it was impossible. And as much as we talk about how much we hate the metas right now and that the game has been very stale because we haven't got new heroes, this is the best balance we've ever had in the game of Overwatch by a large shot. There is not a character that I can point to in the game right now and be like, this character is so overpowered that if you don't play them, you lose. And that is a really good thing. Obviously, nothing's changed in 2 years, which sucks, but, at least we have balance.
Yeah, it's like a pick your poison.
That's a bittersweet of not adding any new characters, that we get closer to the 0 point of like, okay, like, yeah, maybe Baptiste is better than Lucio, but it's not by a wide margin, like where it's like Baptiste is broken where we got to nerf him just so that Lucio can be playable. So it's those are just good points to bring up, that like right now it might not be good for other reasons, but playable wise, you can still pick your favorite hero and you won't be totally like shunned if you're not doing good. You're probably just not good just in general then, if you're it's not because of your pick.
Yeah, and I think it's a very important point, like you said, Custa. And I think this is another argument for why we're going 5v5. Removing I think in most, or in a significant number of Overwatch metas, tank pairings have broken things, especially post 222, right? Whether it's like double shield, pulled pork, double bubble. There's a reason why a lot of these metas are defined by the 2 tanks that spearhead them. And obviously, I know there'll be someone with a facetious argument like, well, just make it 1-on-1 then, make it real balanced, just remove everything. But, within reason, I think it should allow Blizzard to sort of find that middle ground. And again, it's like pick your poison. If you want new heroes, then they will break games, as we've kind of spoken about all these fever dream changes. But if you want staleness, then you will get a balanced meta, but boredom. Now, Lemon, what did you make of the Moth Mercy meta? What was that like for you as a support main at heart?
Same shit. Just anytime I'm trying to hype up an amazing play someone did, I have to hold my breath and be like, where's the fucking Mercy? And it's just even now, that's still true, but at least now it's a lot easier to punish a Mercy because of how long it takes her to fucking animate, and the cooldown is super long. So it's like, even if they do get a res, it's like, I don't know, it's infinity and beyond long. So at least if there was a res, it wasn't like the end of the world. And back then it was, you can't ever get truly excited about a fight because of Mercy. And now that we're gone away from that, it's a lot. I can be more genuine that when a fight is over, it truly is over,
For sure. Yeah, I think that's an important point as well, because you don't want things to invalidate. And this is why people, sometimes complain about immortality. Is like, well, you don't want a thing that invalidates all the hard work someone did to set this thing up. And it was the same with Mass Rez as well. So maybe something to think about with Resurrect and Mercy. But name checking something off, I noted down, it wasn't really a hard meta, but I thought it was worth discussing Clockwork Vendetta, which is a sort of a little phenomenon that occurred for a little bit of a period of time. I think it might even have been pre-roll lock, but essentially a team of one tricks. Were they tier 2, Lemon? They were tier 2, right? Clockwork Vendetta? Or were they even lower than that? Yeah. So do you want to elaborate?
Yeah, they make contenders.
Do you want to elaborate on what they were and how they worked?
Was it Hog, Torb? It was in EU, and I came in a little bit later in the EU. But yeah, they had the one tricks took over contenders. Not even just with Clockwork, but they came into North America as well. And I think because Overwatch also took a lot of the talent, then you had these open division one tricks who squeaked into contenders, and they're good at what they do. And I've interviewed a lot of one tricks of just so how do you play Hammond one tricks, just literally any one trick. I've interviewed them, and I'm like, how do you play against your counters? And it's like, well, there's always a way to play against your counters, and it was so tough. Just more talking about covering the storylines behind one tricks because you're trying to be like, these are the best players in the fucking world, but they can only play one fucking hero. and it was so tough to try and genuinely like hype up that these are real and the best competitors, and they would sometimes win tournaments. I mean, not even just Clockwork Vendetta, is like another team in NA that kept winning everything, and it was kind of frustrating, I'm not gonna lie. But if you want to know what Clockwork Vendetta are playing, I don't remember. Along the Torb and Roadhog stuff.
It was Orisa, Hog, Torb, May, and I don't remember the supports now. But essentially, for context, they were just a team of one tricks cobbled together, and they found a very oppressive, well, not oppressive, but certainly a very strong comp that people struggled to deal with for a while, and it created a little phenomenon. I think a good example of, in a way, how, you know, as frustrating it might be for Lemon to hype them up, in a way it can be insightful for Overwatch to have people who experiment or are hard one tricks and just by, you know, need more than desire, have to find a way to make, you know, their one trick work. And that can create like a fun little moment in Overwatch, I think. Zach, did you kind of catch much of that era?
I've never heard of Clockwork Vendetta, but just, I guess, shining light on it is like very like, it's cool to hear just like how one tricks can even succeed at a semi-pro level, because, you know, like for a majority of us, like 95% of us will never compete at the highest of high ranks, where meta like truly dictates, like for Custa, like meta truly dictates the 1% to get you the possibility of a win. So I always just say, like, listen, yes, meta can matter at bronze, at masters, whatnot, but what also matters is you being good with a hero. And I always tell people, if you're good with Sombra, good with May, good with Symmetra, yeah, they're not meta, but if the enemy team doesn't know how to deal with that, then you can win. That's what Overwatch is about, is the better team wins, the better player wins. So just, yeah, play your Torbjorn or one trick your Roadhog. And if you're not doing good, then maybe it's time to have some diversity in your hero pool. But if you're winning games, keep playing your one trick. Like, that's just like the beauty about Overwatch, is that, you know, like the meta can dictate it, but if it's not relevant to you, then don't switch off of what's not broken.
No,
it was tough. There was a team called Avoided. That's the team I'm remembering, who they all had their one tricks. You had Ball, guess what? Only played Ball and was really good at it through Sombra, Brig, like you name a ball counter, everyone played it. You had like, was it Yazan or something, who only played Pharah, and that's where Venom or Sigma also had his thing, not on this team, but just in that sphere of one tricks rising up in contenders. You had Sigma, aka Venom, who only played Tracer and absolutely shredded everyone. Yezen only played Pharah, Ball only played Ball, I'm Special only played Zarya, and it's just like just these wacky compositions that feel like they're counterable on paper, and every team tried to counter them, you know, hit scans, whatever, and it was like, yeah, one tricks just rose up, and it really made you think, like, oh my god, is there not really a hard counter to some heroes if you really play them at their peak?
Well, I think the thing for one tricks, like in general, and I think that it's worse in ranked, because it's like, you know, I'm playing ranked these days, and there's this like top 20 DPS Torb, and the value that the Torb has in or like a one trick has is they've played against everything. They've played against their counter. They've played against these things at this level. Very few people have played against a Torb who is top 20 on Torb. They play in a different style than every other Torb you've played against in the past, and they're so much better. They understand how you deal with this interaction way better than anyone who doesn't usually play against the one trick, right? Same thing with a Bastion, same thing with a Symmetra. Like, I don't really have this perfect idea of what's the hard counter. The thing is, there is a hard counter. There's a reason nobody plays these heroes, but generally, the counter to these one tricks is playing as a team, which in ranked can generally be the hardest thing to ever do, like, or just like switching to the right things. So I think it's about understanding how to counter these things, but that is why the advantage always goes towards the one trick, because they've spent years, hours, days just perfecting this craft that other people haven't really even thought about. So that's the value of it. And that's like, you know, people are like, oh, well, how would Clockwork Vendetta do an hour? It's like, they could probably beat a team or two. But the thing is, you would eventually get found out, and they would eventually start losing. All it takes is one team to be like, if we play this comp, we counter it. Once everyone sees that, it's over. All of a sudden you get counted, and that's going to force them to switch, which eventually doesn't work for one tricks. So it's really cool to see these one tricks rise up, though.
And I need like a true toilet bowl of like all the one trick teams against each other. It'd be great.
And I can speak on behalf, like, I'm not like a top 500 consistent Mei player, but like Mei's like my one trick hero. And you don't really like, unless you're in an organized team, you don't see a lot of Meis. So not only do you not have a hero that you typically counter on the enemy team, you also have a frustrating hero that you're going against. And you get that a lot with like Torb. It's like, never play against Torb, I'm getting frustrated, that like throws you off your game. And yeah, that's another advantage, is that just the enemy team doesn't know how to deal with it. And it's also ranked. Like, people don't understand how different ranked is compared to contenders, but especially the Overwatch League, where these people are living with each other day in and day out, just talking about the game and coordinating. Yeah, there's a reason why I don't see a lot of one tricks in the Overwatch League, is because they're going to get stopped, because these people get the 1% of the meta advantage.
Yeah, exactly. I think really relevant points that you guys have all made, because, you know, as much as we're talking about the meta, this is the sort of anti-meta, and this is true of a lot of esports as well, where, like, you know, I think of StarCraft as well, where responses is what we might call it, is the name of the game, right? Understanding how to respond to a thing is half the battle, because if you had to make conscious decisions about Overwatch all the time, it'd be massively overwhelming. Like, if every time you played Ana and you were treating a Winston like the first time you've ever seen him, you'd be like, oh my god, I don't know what to do. Like, you know, because you understand, like, the matchup is so key, right? Understanding matchups is super important in Overwatch. If I'm this character, they're this character, this is how our matchup interacts. I can fight them, I can't fight them. And if you're like an Ana and you're playing a Winston, you know, okay, if he's jumping me and he doesn't have a Zarya bubble, I can sleep him, but I gotta wait until his bubble, like, either have to hit him in the air, or have to wait till he drops and he lands his bubble, blah, blah, blah. And then suddenly a one trick comes along and he's like, I'm Torb now. What are you going to do? You going to sleep me?
What
you going to sleep me?
Yeah,
you going to nade
exactly.
me? It's not going to work. It's not going to work, because actually I know how to do it. And that's just the problem of it, right? You don't understand the counter, the matchup, and you're having to make decisions on the fly that guy understands intimately. He's like, I know what to do against Ana. And that's the thing. Sorry, Custa, you were trying to say something.
Yeah.
No, I think you bring up a really interesting point, because people have, like, you know, like, talked to me before, and they're like, oh my god, how did you know this interaction? You must understand the game so well. It's like, I have put thousands of hours. The only way you get good at these things is if I ever have to think in the game of that Winston interaction, right? Of like, when am I throwing my sleep? That has to be automatic. As soon as you start thinking about that moment, then you're going to get overwhelmed, as you said. The reason these players get so good, and the reason they seem to do things automatically, is because they've done the same situation hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. And that automation of everything is what makes them very, very good. And that's what puts them to that next level. And that's why people are like, oh, how do I get better? Literally, the best way to get better is to just keep playing the game. Repetition, understanding to the point where you can play the game almost automatically.
Exactly.
It's
And
really just like it's just like anything in life. Like, if you want to get better at basketball, shoot 103 free throws every single day and you'll get better. If you want to get better at casting, you got to cast actual games every single day, be a pro player. You got to there's a reason why they play like 6 to 8 hours a day. It's because, well, they just got to keep practicing and practicing. And yeah, that's just how you get better. Is just be in this situation 1,000 times. So it's like your brain recognizes, oh, I've done this before. I know what to do when a Winston is diving me.
yeah, and to your point earlier as well, Zach, about, you know, because people come to me a lot and they ask, like, SCB, what's a good pick to climb? You know, like, what's a good character to climb with? And I'm always like, whatever you like playing. Yeah, whatever you like playing, that's the one.
Same here.
Because like the thing about what we're talking about as well, and perhaps this whole discussion, it's based on a lot of optimality, right? It's based on, like, if the optimal is done with this comp, it's good. But suddenly, like, 5% less, it's garbage all of a sudden. It falls apart, right? Goats, if suddenly you're like Lemon was talking about, like, if your Reinhardt just pins in, this all falls apart, and this comp now looks really bad. And it's the same in ranked as well, where it's like, you know, we might talk about, like, oh, if you run double shield like this, is it better for me to flex on the 5 heroes SVB and learn all of them so to understand how each I can complement my off tank? No, man. Just play one character you like.
No, man.
Yeah.
just play the character you like and understand how that character plays in all these situations, and then you can beat all these players rather than having to, like, play 8D chess and be like, oh, well, I was doing the right thing, but then my Reinhardt just pinned, and now, you know, me playing Ana here is a bad. Now all of a sudden it's like, yeah, that's the whole point.
Like, there's a top 500 player for every single hero, and the reason for that is because they mastered the hero. They understand, like, when it can work, when it cannot work, and they learn not to be in the situation of when it doesn't work, because they just mastered everything. And that's the best way to get better, is just practice what you want to play.
It also is frustrating when you cast those like one tricks, and yeah, they're so amazing, right? But then you're like, as a caster, you're trying to justify, okay, what is the key to success for this other team? And you're like, okay, well, they should obviously go like these counters, and okay, those counters aren't working. So now you're like, okay, now it's actually about just being good at the game. And
Yeah.
yeah, so that's
Isn't that the idea of esports? Is just being good at the
skill
game?
diff there. There's a bit of a skill diff.
Hey, caster, what should they do? I don't know. Just be better. Just get good.
I don't know, just get better. And that's like the worst type of shit you could say as a caster. Of like, I guess it's just a team diff because it's so BM too. So
Okay, well, back to the meta rundown. There's a nice little, I think, important segue. But back to some of the metas that we're kind of getting closer to the modern era now, where like we said, we haven't had too many changes, which has resulted in perhaps a little bit of staleness, but also a decent amount of variation, especially like Custa pointed out. Now that we haven't had like pro Overwatch for a while, things are starting to get a little bit weird again. So first thing I'm going to name check is the Giga Rein that appeared for a little bit of time, where he had his 85 damage swings, and suddenly everyone was like, wait, do we play Rein now? Is Rush the thing all of a sudden? And then within a month, and actually I'm in the same sentence, I'm going to name check the Giga Genji that appeared for like two weeks. And suddenly everyone's pulling out the Nano blade, and it was all Genjis all over. And then they nerfed both quite promptly. So any memories of the Giga Genji, Giga Rein? Custa, heading over to you
Giga
first.
Genji is iconic. Summer Showdown of 2020, right? I think it was, where they I remember seeing the buffs and I'm like, that's heavy-handed in terms of the buffs. They made Genji's biggest weakness is that he can't brawl effectively. When he doesn't pull the blade, he doesn't really offer as much as you could with a lot of these other characters. But then they just buffed him across the board, and he just became super strong. And Genji mains came out of the woodwork. They're like, I don't have to play Brig anymore. I can play Genji again. Oh yes, and they did it for a 4-week stint. And then they locked the Genjis back up because they pretty much reverted almost every single nerf, every single buff that they implemented. But it was a really interesting time. And it was an awesome, I don't think anyone has a problem with those kind of buffs and nerfs, as long as it's not for a long form of time and maybe a little bit too oppressive. But I was fine playing against Genjis for a month. If I had to do it for a year like GOATs, I would be very upset. But that was a good time.
I think I always thought Genji was just an ult bot, and then when he had all these damage nerfs, I was like, wait, what? Genji's now a shield breaker? Wait, what? Genji can it was just
Genji
weird wrapping my
shield.
caster brain around Genji as a shield breaker. But yeah, not a fun time as a support, especially a non-Brig player support where you had to just get your ass handed to you every time by Genji. I mean, you usually do against Genji, because especially if you're like me and you can't shoot heads good. But now that he could just kill you faster, it was just not the funnest of time. But there was a silver lining that, okay, now Genji is useful outside of his ult, so that was cool to just baby hype up, and maybe there's an argument that he is good without his ult, but at least more so, where he had more potential, especially against all the CC in the game. You just never thought, at least at the contenders level, which I've been casting, it's you never really expect much out of a contender's Genji unless he has his ult and an Ana. So it was now he had more potential, so it was nice, but not for playing.
Zach, the DPS main in you, were you rejoicing, or were you left clicking on top of the Genji as main?
So I don't play Genji that much, but I think just to add to the conversation, I think and this might be a stupid take, but I think anytime that a buff is given to a popular hero like Genji or Reinhardt or Mercy, it almost even though there's going to be people that hate the buff, I think anything that makes the game popular in any sense is good for the game. And whether the buff is BS or not, I think it's either way, it can be more beneficial than not. Not saying that Giga Genji or Giga Rein was better for the game, but it does have some value compared to buffing Symmetra or something,
Poor Sim mains is crying, let us have a buff, man.
Yeah.
Let us have a buff.
I will say Symmetra mains are the most vocal out of next Mercy mains, Twitter, it's always Mercy and Symmetra mains that are the most vocal.
No, and it's a good point. Obviously we don't want, this is the pick your poison that Custa's talking about. If you want balance, then you won't get these little fun periods when suddenly the hero you've been dying to play is suddenly meta now, and you can play him. And also there's a little bit of a psychological effect, I think, when a hero gets buffed. Everyone's like, can I try this hero? And I remember actually that was very explicitly Blizzard's justification. They were like, actually, Genji and Soldier are the 6th and 7th most picked heroes already. And then they were like, well, fine, we'll buff him anyways. We'll buff him anyways. Here you go. You guys don't play him enough. That's the real problem. You guys don't play these characters. And yeah, then they just threw in Genji. And I know because I had a lot of people come into me and they were like, SCB, I'm a support player and I'm just tired of getting Nano bladed every fight. And it was like
hey, true.
It was the duality of Ana. It was like with one hand she enables the Nano blade, with one hand she dies to it. You know, like it was just
just hit sleep good, you know, like
exactly. There was
and
a lot
people
of
wake it up
montages.
and you're still fucked. So
True.
Very true. Support mains just, you know, hearing that one deep in their hearts for a little moment. But yeah, on the Giga Rein, by the way, because that's my guy. That felt like a very clumsy buff. I enjoyed it, but it was like our hammer guy. He struggled to beat long range pokey thing. What we do? We give hammer guy bigger hammer. We give him bigger, stronger hammer, and he beat them up better now. And it was a fun little period when it was like, whoa, I could just like destroy these dudes with this hammer, and then you know they had to take that away from us as well. So you know, a brief little respite, and I'm sure that's how Genji mains feel, where they were like, there was a moment when I could do it, but no. Okay.
I remember Cloudy coming into NA ranked and just he would duo with a Lucio player and he would just instantly join the game and be like, we're playing Brawl. And if you didn't play Brawl, he just got really upset about it. And he hit like rank 1, I think, on NA and EU, because Brawl, as we all know, especially over the last few years, is a very oppressive comp. It's kind of like GOATS in a way that, like, if you're not going to play Brawl, you need to work very well as a team and coordinated effort to shut it down. While it's just easy to go, I pick Rein. I run at enemy really fast with Lucio and then just run with their hammers. So like I'm a big disliker of Brawl. So like I really don't like these Giga Rein metas. But it's I like it when it comes and goes in a way, right? Like it's kind of like the Nano Genji thing. Is like I don't mind playing a little bit of Brawl, but when it feels like I've been playing Brawl for like 3 months, and if I don't play Lucio, I'm throwing the game. That's when it really starts to feel bad.
It shakes things up.
Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned that because I did a video with Cloudy at the time about like a guide on how to play Reinhardt, and I remember like it's called Thought Process. So the idea was that I would interview really good players and I asked them like what they actually are thinking. Like we would review a game together, and I'll stop and I'll be like, so why did you make this decision here? And in hindsight, trying to do that with Cloudy is like it's quite the challenge really, because Cloudy's a man of few words. If you've ever spoken to Cloudy, he's a man of few words. Yeah. And at the start of the game, I was like, okay, Cloudy. These are the two comps. Tell me what what do you approach when you see these two comps? How do you see this matchup lining up? And he was like, I don't care about comp. I only want Lucio. If I have Lucio, I play like this. If I have no Lucio, I don't play like this. And I was like, okay, well, thanks for that insight, Cloudy. So Lucio good, everything else you don't care. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. And that's how it feels when you play those games against Cloudy. Is like he's just running in your, and like the frustrating thing about it is that like as the support player on the opposition team, you're just like as a Zenyatta, I'm like really far away from him, and you're like, he's getting closer. He's getting closer. Oh shit. Just starting to panic, and then eventually you're dead, right? And that's the frustrating thing of it.
Oh yeah, and to clarify, it was they gave him the Giga armor, the Giga swing, and then they gave him the extra armor, which they then took away as well. That was when people were like the 50 extra armor was like giving Cloudy, Giga juice. But eventually they took the juice. One other thing I noted down here was, again, some of these are, it's hard to remember that these existed, but hero pools was a thing for a long time. Again, there was a section of the community that begged for hero bans, and instead we got this, abomination monster called hero pools, where for those who missed it, Blizzard would essentially rotate certain heroes out of the meta based on, initially it was like just they decided themselves. And then they let cats decide. Then they let Zoe's cat decide what would be banned and what wouldn't be, which I think is a fantastic way to balance your esports, and definitely speaks volumes about the competitive integrity of that bit. But yeah, what did we make of the hero pool era? Some people like it.
I kind of want to speak to this because it's like I was a massive advocate for hero bans going into 2020. And I think I have since gone back on that, and I've been like, hero bans are a really bad idea, mainly because of seeing the effect of hero pools. I think the way hero pools were implemented in 2020 was really bad. Too fast of a rotation. Like you're doing it every 2 weeks. That never gives anyone any time to practice, work out what's good. It really just became chaos. And I think that was the realizing moment for me where I was like, if you put hero bans in the game, it's going to take unless they like very slowly balance, it would take impossible for anyone to work out the game, and it would have just been chaos. Like if every game something random is taken out or something, like it just, instead of making it competitive and like changing the structure and the strategy, it would have just become chaos. And that's what was wrong with the 2-week hero pools. As you said, it was random. There was no rhyme or reason. It just felt bad because all the teams just looked like they were scrambling to just get a map win. I think they did a lot better job of it in 2021, where it's like every like second stage there's hero pools. So it's like you have one whole stage of a certain meta, and then like half of that time all the heroes are available, and then the other half they took it out based on playtime, I think it was, to just guarantee that certain heroes wouldn't just be played the same time again. Obviously, in an ideal world, we would never need hero pools, but you know, it's been a hard couple of years.
I definitely agree that I think there's a world where it could be really fun to just shake up the meta without having to do patches in that way. I think it's the execution that would have helped the teams out a lot more. Like I'm thinking like before season even starts, like, hey, like, and especially the length of the hero pools too. Like, oh, if this month was this hero pool and they got it all in advance. So if you have this month or 2 months before the season starts, okay, like this month is this hero pool, this month is this hero pool, and then you have it all in advance. And then also make the picks or the hero pools make sense. Like don't take out 2 hit scans and let Pharah just dominate 1 month. Like don't take out the only counters to like really oppressive heroes. Like don't let a cat decide, but just have it be a little bit strategic and maybe based on playtime or something. But I think more notice, longer amounts of hero pools, and a little bit more logic behind it. Although it is fun for content to have a cat or bingo ball, whatever, that's fine. But I think with the right execution, it could make for really interesting because it innovating the meta I think also separates teams. There are some teams that are better at it, and if they execute, I think they do deserve to be the quote, masters of Overwatch. That sounds bad, but the best team in Overwatch is the people that should adapt and innovate and execute better at the end of the day. And I think Hero Pulse has a way of introducing that, but again, it's about the execution and it's tricky.
Only in Overwatch is Masters in Overwatch a slur, an insult.
I know. I was like, wait, Masters, wait, no, Grandmasters.
I would have you know, I'm 4.5K. Actually, thank you very much,
bitch.
Zach, how did you feel about the cat banning May? That's gotta tore you up, man.
So I remember it was. I don't think it was the cat that banned May, but like no, they did ban. But in the very first like ever seen banned, May did get banned, and I remember making a video specifically of my main getting banned and being upset about it. But I think that's something also that people don't realize, that like this is for like competitive integrity. People in rank ladders don't care. They want to play their May. They want to play their Mercy. They want to play the hero. So when they log on and they're not able to play for a week because their favorite hero is gone, it's just like, F this game. Like, like I can't play my favorite hero. But then also something that Lemon brought up is that it does kind of the opposite of what the purpose of it is. I remember, I don't know if it was 2-hit scan or 3-hit scan, but either way, there was like a Soldier, a Cole, and I want to say an Ashe that was banned, but definitely 2-hit scan. The meta was Pharah. For that week. So it's like,
it's so rough.
What the heck are we doing? What's the point of this if you're trying to make a new meta? And I'm kind of surprised at the Overwatch League level that it wasn't faster to find the meta when you get the heroes that are banned. But it was an interesting way to try to counter goats. And for content wise, it was fun to wonder like, okay, well, who's gonna get banned? Is my main gonna get banned? Like, what's gonna happen? But I do understand that, like, okay, yeah, League of Legends can do that because they have 1 billion characters. Overwatch, that's like 10% of the hero roster, and that's a lot. And it just maybe down the road hero bans can be a thing, but it just can't work. I was an advocate too for it because I saw League do it. I thought we should have just pitched the heroes like in each and every single game, but it would slow down the pace of the game too to just pick them and whatnot.
I want to jump on that as well really quickly. Like people say it's like, oh, well, like people should just learn how to play other characters. That's like they do in Dota and League of Legends. It's a great point of like, if you've played a lot of League of Legends and Dota, if there's a hero, there is about 3 or 4 that play almost exactly the same as that hero. Every character has their own unique niche, but in Overwatch, that's just not true. No one plays the game like Tracer does. No one provides the same amount of like utility that Lucio does, right? Like those heroes are so impactful and literally cover off like 30% of the metas that already exist when you just take that one hero out. And that is the problem. The hero roster is just not big enough, as Zach said.
Yeah, this is funny because the Group Up podcast, the bingo card always includes a mention of hero bands, because I'm a big proponent of hero bands. I know my man Frito is a big proponent of hero bands as well. But I think, I think you guys all raise very interesting points. Anyways, I'm not certainly one of those people who's like, death to all anti-hero banners. But I think it's one of those interesting.
I think I don't mean to cut you off. I'm so sorry, but I think it's also due to the fact that we're not one tricks. Like Custa can play multiple, you can play multiple. I like, even though I like May, I'm not gonna be a child about it and complain. Like I'm gonna play somebody else. You know, it's just like that's just how it is. If it's for the greater good of the game.
Well, this is the thing, and I think this is what I was gonna raise, is that I think while we're on this tangent, I think there's a lot of things about Overwatch, like conversations about Overwatch, that we haven't had in terms of what the theory behind the game is and what the actual reality is. And I think the whole diverse hero pool is one of these conversations, because I think, again, Overwatch is built a lot on this idea that at its conception it was pick whatever heroes you want, and counter picking, they pick this, I'll pick that, you do this. That's what the game is all about. And in theory it was, but especially nowadays, I think people like their mains, and they like their mains. Like I think most people know maybe 2 to 3 heroes with any real competence maximum, right? And that's it. Like those are the heroes they sign up to play. And as much as we talk about like meta, and this whole thing is about meta, and we talk about like counter picking, and you need to do this, that, the other, for the majority of people that's just irrelevant. Like they're just like, no, I play these characters, that's it. That's what I play Overwatch for. So I think that's like a conversation to be had at some point. I think it would be really insightful to have that conversation with the developers maybe, and just be like, well, you guys make this game about like counter picking and hero diversity, but most people just play like 2 heroes. So do we need to have like a conversation at some point? Because another wild idea that I'm like, maybe we should just we should just lock the hero at the start of the game. Like maybe we should just remove switching, because that would make the game easier to balance as well. If you didn't have to because one of the problems is switching in the middle of the game, right? That creates a whole thing. But
I think that the problem with that would just be like, you could lose in the lobby in the hero select scene. Like obviously in games like, like let's use Valorant for an example, like you have all these abilities and that does help you in something, but at the end of the day, everyone has the same guns, right? While in Overwatch, it's like, let's say we picked, like no hit scans and nothing like that, and you said they come out and Mercy, you're like, see you in the next game. Like it's just kind of over at that point. So I really like the idea of like, because I'm the same way as you. I love the idea of like switching mid-game. I love the idea of diversity from game to game and solving each problem and like making it more about the problem solving. But from what I saw of these hero pools and stuff like that, it just reminded me that it's going to lead, people aren't going to do that problem solving issue, and it's just going to make the game worse, and people are going to force it. And like, I don't even want to know what happens when a Torb 1 trick is all of a sudden locked away from his Torb 1 trick. And they're like, well, I'm throwing this game, I'm going sim, and I don't know how to use a teleporter. Like, those kind of things.
No, absolutely. And again, it could be the topic of another entire podcast. I won't tangent onto it. As much as inside I'm burning and desperate to have this conversation, because it's a road I've been treading for a while, and all the variations that it could come with. But sticking to on topic, unless Lemon, you have anything you want to add to the whole thing? No,
good.
Lemon's like, no, I'm out. Please, no.
I'm out.
Okay. Next on the list that I noted down was the double off tank meta. Again, speaking of Giga buffs that we spoke about, there was that period when the Giga buffed Hog, and the Washington Justice rode that wave for quite the glorious stage. So what did we make? And to be honest, as a tank main, it was a painful time in ladder too, when it was just Zarya Roadhog everywhere. So anyone with burning thoughts on the double off tank meta?
I think it really goes back to your point, SBB, of what we said earlier, of like some people were willing to take the risk and be like, let's just play Roadhog Zarya in these playoffs. Like maybe it'll work and see how far it gets you. And you saw a couple of teams like Washington Justice, Seoul Dynasty go very far in the playoffs because they just committed to it. There were a lot of other teams that could have played it, but decided not to and play it safe. And yeah, well, I can't remember exactly what the buffs to Hog were, but he was like, his damage just went into like orbit or something like that. And he just became almost unkillable. So it was a really interesting time. But as you said, it's one of those games where it's like, okay, let the off tanks have fun for a little bit. Everyone else, I'm sorry, just you got a bad month coming for you, because it was bad as a support main as well and as a main tank at that point.
Lemon?
I don't even know if that really hit contenders too much, or at least it was super brief if it ever did. So I'm really not remembering even casting that. Maybe because it was probably like halt hook type of brief. So yeah, not really any real opinions. Besides, I always like metas with Zarya. I like scaling. I like things taking time, but not exactly with Hog. Anything with Hog has been bad. So yeah.
True.
I think everyone who doesn't play Hog can
Yeah.
agree with that one.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't remember anything about this meta in particular too. I think now we're just getting into the era where we're slightly buffing the damage by like 1 point. And nothing too drastic, like not like reworking, giving new ultimates. But yeah, no, Roadhog. Yeah, I don't I don't know if he's meta right now. Like I don't think he's meta right now, but I see him so much right now that I'm like, he can't be. Can he? Like yeah. So I agree with you guys that anything with Hog, it's just it's a rough time.
What's meta is the priority pass farming meta. That's what's meta
True.
right now. Everyone locks the Roadhog because they don't want to play. They don't really want to play tank, but they have to for these passes. So yeah, no, it was. I think they buffed his damage and reduced his ammo. I think if I'm remembering correctly, like they gave him like
I have
6
it
to
pulled
5 or
up,
something.
like, yeah, 6 to 5 damage projectile from 6 to 7, recovery increase 0.7 to 0.85. So like nothing too drastic now. Now we're just like slightly tweaking the heroes to make them a little bit more.
Well, I think it's because the pellets really exponentially scale because there's a lot of pellets. So I think even that
Yeah.
little tweak made it really impactful. Because
no, it's still, it's still impactful.
But you're right. It's like it's in the grand scheme of things. We're talking shield generators and Valkyrie resets. Compared to that, this is nothing. It's like, we just literally one up and down. But yeah, when the meta is stable and stale, like Custa spoke about, that's when these little changes actually do have pretty big ramifications. Yeah, I know there was a lot of. I think that did irreparable damage. Not gonna lie, because it encouraged so many hog mains to come out of the woodworks.
Yeah.
I feel like we'd finally lock them away where they belong, and then one time they get buffed, they're just like, nah, man, the hog is great. I can get picks all day.
It's even even any changes at all that happen. People go in on the ladder and just fucking want to test it out right away. So it's a buff, a nerf, whatever it is. If Roadhog is even looked at funny by the dev team, people will just auto lock it in ranked. And I just have to always dodge that whole first week of a patch, no matter what it is, because people are gonna hard lock it, not know if it's strong. It's probably shit, and then you just get rolled.
I wonder if that's something the dev should do. They should like say they buffed something, just not buff it, and see what happens, and see if someone like everyone just starts
a little placebo.
Oh my god, April Fools, that would be great.
Well, you can't do it on April Fools because everyone would know it's a potential joke, right? You got to sneak it in and then just
No, if
fuck
the
with
patch
us.
notes look legit, like people eat
Yeah.
that shit up.
That's what they did today with Sigma. I think they tried to like, I didn't read the patch notes for Sigma, but he got new socks. Yeah, they gave him socks.
Oh,
I
no.
love that.
That's
real.
My
Oh
feet.
no, they got rid of his toes.
They've destroyed the unique desire for Sigma, like the one appeal of the
Yeah.
character. They've destroyed it.
He has no more sex appeal now. There's no point.
Bro, Christian, bro.
Let's move on to the next meta.
Yeah, should we dwell on that? No, okay. Okay, so moving on, another couple of things. I think poke comps are worth talking about because that's, I would say, a relatively new iteration. Thinking of the grand scheme of Overwatch, poke wasn't really a thing. Correct me if I'm wrong. Poke never really was a thing early Overwatch. Like you didn't sit there and poke for ages. You kind of just dove or you brawled, and that's kind of it.
Could you explain poke to me? Because I think I know what you mean, but could you explain it?
Sure, yeah. I mean, basically, you're looking at comps that played a lot slow, Sigma Ball, a lot of range damage, sometimes Tracer as well. And essentially, if you think about a dive comp is like, okay, we set up and then we jump on this thing. And I think a brawl comp is like, okay, we get to where we want to and then we speed boost on this thing. So they're very like immediate. Whereas I think a lot of poke comps are a lot of like, they're like attritional battles, I guess, right? They're like comps based on weathering down certain resources. You're just poking, and then when something happens, you go. Which I suppose you could say for many comps, but I do think they're unique for the sense of like the way they're played with the Sigma Ball or sometimes variations of it. So thoughts on poke? I'll take it to Custa first.
I think it's an interesting one. Like when I think of poke, I think of like you're playing like the Mercy Zen Ashe or something like that, and you're just sort of like playing really far away enough that they can't come into you. But then you have, as you said, you have that Tracer, Ball, or a Sigma all taking angles around. And as you said, it's more like you're taking map control, and you're just trying to take as much space as you can, and then hoping at some point, as you said, something happens. I think it's a really interesting comp because I think it really incentivizes playing smart and everyone having their own role. My biggest problem about it is that it can be squashed pretty easily by like certain things, like just them having a brig can really like ruin your ball and Tracer's day. Or like if you're Ashe or the DPS that's getting hard pocketed just doesn't do anything, you just lose. So I don't think I've ever really seen it massively in Overwatch League. Like the only time you ever really see that ball Tracer played is if they're going for that hard dive with like the Briggs Zen, right? So it's a lot more of a ranked meta, but I think it's interesting. It's a cool variation, as you said, because nothing else has ever really been played like that because we played so much Lucio, Rush, snipers, and all that kind of stuff.
You probably kind of intuitively played that, Zach. So like in your latter games, how do you feel about it?
So when I heard poke, I was thinking like Soldier 76, a pocketed Ashe, just like poking at because of the double shield. You need to destroy the shield, and that's the moment that I think you referred to when you go in. But then you brought up like ham and ball. It's like, okay, so maybe that's not what I'm thinking of. But so when I thought of poke, I thought of those low but consistent damage to destroy the shield, and then so it's just poke, reload, poke, reload, and you have protection because you're poking from far and back away. Because I think now we're getting into the area where a lot of like DPS can be played, and I'm starting to see like, and I could be completely wrong here, like Soldier is maybe kind of making a name for himself. He's not meta broken, but Soldier, at least from my recollection, has never really been the top picked hero. So when I heard poke, it's like, okay, is this the time when Soldier is coming into play?
Yeah.
Not since very early Overwatch when when AKM was love and life, basically.
Yeah.
There was a time, actually. Go ahead, Custa.
No, you go.
I was gonna say, just a quick reminder. Again, we've been on many history lessons today, but there was a time when D.Va's defense matrix was the entire length of attack visor.
Yeah.
And so there was like this whole meta where Soldier was really strong because everyone was really bad, right? To context, Cassidy's High Noon and Soldier's Tack Visor were like top tier, S tier ults because everyone was really bad at using natural cover. So they would pop Tack Visor and everybody dies. And so you need, I mean, D.Va has been like a near must pick for the first, many years of Overwatch. You needed D.Va because that entire, like the DM was ridiculously obnoxious. It would eat the entire Tack Visor. And if she didn't have one, the Soldier would just run rampant. So yeah, not since those early days has he been a thing. Lemon, what do you feel about kind of poke? You've probably seen a lot of poke comps and contenders and stuff.
I think it depends like what poke comp it is, and it also, I feel like it forced out just so much double shield so that people had more safety around rotations, especially on if you're the offense, maybe more so on the defense. You had to have the double shield with your poke. I mean, I'm thinking when I think poke of like, either your Cassidy, Ashes, stuff like that. Ashe was really strong for like a really long time on many defenses in contenders. And that was fine because Dynamite was pretty to look at and it was poke, but it was a little slow because you would just have, it really depends the game type too, but then you would have one team kind of sit there and they poke each other, but at least the offense had somewhere to go, so there was some movement. But yeah, I think it just, poke really forced out the double shield just for, because contenders are always going to go for the safest, less risk composition because they don't have the coaches, they don't have the resources to really dive into other metas around poke or just something that is harder to execute but stronger overall. So you just really had a lot of double shield poke, which was usually very boring to watch.
Yeah, and this is where again I think we've gotten to areas now where the definition of the meta isn't so strict, right? And a lot of people have kind of said, well, yeah, poke, it's kind of it means a slightly different thing to me than it does to you. And I think poke, and poke is like a very broad term, right? Ghost is very specific. It's like, this is the 6 players you play. Whereas like, Dive has seen many iterations, Double Bubble being one of them. Brawl has kind of seen slight variations here or there. And poke is definitely one where there's a lot of different things. Now, I'm conscious we're running out of time because we've got commitments and I'm very grateful for the time you guys give me. So wrapping up, I want to now, having kind of touched, I think, on almost all the significant metas, I think, unless we really missed something. Now is our time to look back at it all and say, this was it. This was the one. So I'm going to go in turn and ask each of you guys what you think was the best and the worst metas that we've seen. So I'm going to start with Lemon.
I'm thinking anything Brawl, but I know Brawl can be very broad. So I'm thinking like I kind of when Zach brought up the May Reaper and May Doomfist. I honestly do think that May plus some kind of bursty DPS was really fun to cast, but more towards like a Rein Zarya type of brawl instead of the Orisa double shield. Because first there was just always this like forward momentum. There's always some kind of movement. So I really like movement. I mean, hence my experimental patch. So anything double shield, but brawling cool. But then May added this kind of chess game mechanic where the team that could place their May wall a little bit better and just had the right split on the team that forced like really, because it wasn't an automatic fight win because a lot of maps didn't like May, and then you would, it depends how the other team reacts. Do they break the wall? Do they jump over the wall? And May kind of had this cool chess game because then you would have a May mirror and then those kind of interactions happen. And then either the Doomfist or the Reaper was being used depending on your region or really preference. And then Reaper had a cool follow-up. Once you trap people, the Reaper would go in. Or the Doomfist would punch off the wall. And it created this like these micro interactions that I felt were kind of difficult to pull off really well. So it added a level of complexity. It added like an actual win condition that isn't an ultimate, which I found at least you're not just waiting for ults to pop up. And there were ults. I mean, even May provides a good ult and a good like neutral fight. So just anything around brawl where there's movement and some kind of micro interaction that has some kind of difficulty to it. So my immediate thought is like May, Reaper, Doomfist, like those stuff. So that was my favorite.
What do you never want to see again?
Double sniper. I know I'm gonna hate, everyone's gonna hate this because it's like it takes the most amount of skill to be able to snipe, right? And you're like, oh my god, like this Widow just killed like 5 people, and like, but those are like the 1% moments that you wait for in double sniper. And as a caster, when you're just observing a Widow miss, and you're just like, you're trying so hard to not flame or trying to hype them up for this moment, and then they don't fucking hit anything, or they hit a body shot. It gets, even if they get a pick, it gets fucking rezzed, and you're just sitting there getting edged the whole time by snipers. And at least I guess I haven't casted at the owl level, so maybe like double sniper is way better at the owl level, but at any other level, it's just so trash because it's both teams being very far away from each other, and just maybe you get a pick, maybe it gets res, maybe it doesn't, and then most of the time the observers don't even know who's gonna do something. So sometimes you fucking T-tours the Widow popping off, and then you're like, well, I don't know what just happened. So double sniper is honestly the most like, it takes a lot of skill, and I'm very impressed when it does get pulled off, but most of the time it's boring.
I think you should flame them more. I think when they're missing, you should be there just like, who is this dog shit? Absolute dog. Just like, hit a shot. Just that's your caster. Just like, hit a shot challenge.
I have this clip where I'm just like watching some like whatever player, and I'm just like, I'm ready to hype him up because he's bad, because I know he's a good player, and I was like, I'm looking at this guy, and he miss, and I had already prepped this statement of like, he's missing shots.
He's real bad.
And I had to completely rewind my sentence, and it turned into a funny moment. But it's just, honestly, those are the moments that I just get blue balled, and it's just horrible.
Yeah. I like how sexual your references have been, edging and blue balling all the time with your casting. It's very very horny casting.
Accuracy.
Very horny casting.
It's just, I don't know how else.
I'm gonna have to cut you off on that. No chance to defend yourself because I'm conscious of the time. You're conscious of the time. Custa, my man, what's your best and worst metas?
I have a soft spot for that like double Zen double Tracer meta that I talked about, because that was like the entry to competitive for me, and I was playing the Zen, and Zen was fun there. But I think my favorite meta of all time is probably Genji Ana when Ana had the speed boost, because I was playing the Ana, and I think you're always playing for that big sleep moment onto the Nano Blade in Genji. There's so much to heal. There's so much going on. And I think the cool thing about it is that everyone was so valuable in that composition. The Lucio was all about pushing people around, keeping your Ana safe. The Ana's trying to keep everyone else alive. And everyone's always moving. And I don't think there's a single role that can look back at that time and be like, that was a boring time. Because I feel like that happens in a lot of other metas. Like, Brawl, like I think so, like supports can be pretty boring to play. Off-tank can be a little boring to play with certain things. Like, that is my like penultimate meta. For worst meta, I actually don't like Brawl. I'm the opposite of LemonKiwi, but I'm going to go more specific with it. And any Brawl that has a Symmetra in it. I hate Symmetra Brawl with a burning passion because I think it mitigates and negates a lot of the fun interactions that happen when they clash. And if I have to see 2 sim walls go up as 9 turrets go across the walls, and then all of a sudden I don't know where I am anymore, and then someone just like randomly dies, that's my biggest problem with Overwatch. I think anytime it just becomes so much of a cluster that it's almost impossible to discern what's happening, those are my worst matters.
And you've annoyed LemonKiwi so much that she just tells us that her power went off. So if you're wondering why she's looking down in this very pensive frame, she's like, "No, bro, get out of here, Custa." No, but I think anytime anyone criticizes Overwatch as a visual spectacle, they always bring up the sim wall screenshots where it's like just crossing each other. Okay, Zach, what about you, man? What's your favorite and what's your least favorite?
So my personal favorite, just like me personally, is when Roku came in and Mei was finally viable, because that was before she had the downfall of a bunch of nerfs, like with her wall, with her freeze, with everything. So that was like the glorious time where I personally climbed. But I think for the best time that I don't think a lot of people complained is right around when Dive was kind of at its peak. Like that was like somewhat coordinated Overwatch, a Winston and a Diva, and maybe you had a Chaser and a Genji, and you know, like those are fun characters to play. I don't really hear people complain about it too much, but I also do think like maybe right now I think is maybe kind of the best time, because yeah, you might have double shield, you might have poke, you might have whatever, but those are all like a variety of heroes. Like you can't point to one single hero like, yeah, they're overpowered like Brig, or yeah, Reaper and Beyblade is overpowered. It's like right now it's relatively balanced. You know, Baptiste is still good and whatnot, and Pharmacy is still a great one. But I think right now, and my personal favorite, double shield was good. As terms of worst meta, I well, there goes Lemon. She hated my double shield, but I think goats, and it's less so about gameplay and more so about the social interaction and the consequences of it. And so many people left, and a lot of people maybe didn't watch Overwatch League because of that. So many people were turned off, and the consequences that it had because of just one single character. I think that meta is the worst, more than just how unfun it was to play. It was just because of the grand scheme of things that it hurt Overwatch a lot for years to come that we're still feeling. I mean, we're going 5v5 now, and I think it's all due to the fact that metas are so it's such an integral part, and it was part of the reason of GOATs, you know.
No, I think that's pretty much true. I don't think there's many people, even GOATS fans, could deny that we did lose a lot of viewers and a lot of interest in Overwatch around that time. Of course, for many other reasons, you know, lack of content was another reason too. But
yeah,
I know. Yeah, you know, we kind of, obviously this is heavily personally biased, right? So we did I think a pretty good job of looking at a pretty objective overall picture. But then, you know, it comes down at the end of the day to your hero pool, and you're like, well, the hero pool where my guy was completely dumpster, I hated, and you know, the ones where he was good was, and that's kind of how it is for me. I think maybe this is definitely personal bias, but my favorite eras of Overwatch were pre-Roadlock, when there was that meta diversity, when we were looking at like Envious and Rogue and the Apex tournaments in Korea. Like I really have fond memories of that time. Every day I go to night dreaming of that one clip of Taimu hooking on Dorado, and I think it's Carpe that he snipes. Yeah, it's Bunny. No, it's Bunny.
He murders Bunny.
It's Bunny. It's Bunny. And then I remember, like that was my peak era Overwatch. So I know it's for many valid reasons we switched away from that, but that was kind of that's the feel that I want in Overwatch in its ideal state, when it feels like, you know, there's a lot of interesting variations on comps, and everyone's getting to express their own individual, you know, take on the game. So who knows? I think there's a chance for 5v5 to take us that way. I think least favorite meta for me as a original main tank player was the double off tank. I think I put up with a lot of like metas where I'm like, this isn't great. And even now it's not great as a main tank, but the double off tank meta was the one where I legit was like, I'm not playing this role anymore. And I stopped playing main tank. And now I'm a fully support player. So yeah,
Welcome.
Yeah, it's pretty fun. I got to say, I just played Ana. I got her to GM. I was like loving life. So yeah, I enjoy support now. I'm a support main now.
I guess just my final thoughts on this whole entire thing, I guess makes you wonder like, well, what do you like better? Time periods right now where it's a lot more balanced, or times where things are in chaos, but it adds variety where Bastion's meta 1 week, 1 month, and then Mercy's meta 1 month, and then Doomfist is. And I guess like beforehand, I thought getting to that balanced 0 point would be fun, but I think living in it's like I think I'm going back on my word, and I kind of like when there's chaos, when there's a broken hero that we can all just complain about. And even though it's not good for the game, I think it's fun for the community to like at least have something to point to, like that's a problem and whatnot. And I know that's weird and crazy to say, like, why would you want broken heroes? But I think it just adds variety when the game's constantly changing, new heroes are getting added, and I kind of miss that. Maybe I just miss it, and I'm nostalgic.
Yeah, I think nostalgia plays a really big role. Like, I don't think there's ever a consistent time in which everyone says, like, for me, if we're talking like golden age of era, like it'd be end of 2016, early 2017, the same as USVB. That's like peak Apex. But I was like a professional player. It was like I was traveling to Korea. It was like the best time in my opinion. But there's a lot of people that like, there was a lot of problems with that era of like Overwatch. It's just nostalgic, and that's what I remember. And I think that's the same for everyone. And that's why like some people love more recent metas. As you said, even though you can point to glaring issues at these things, if you found it fun, you found it fun.
I think that's a perfect summary of this sentiment. Unfortunately, I don't think Lemon is going to make it back in time. So we'll die with a mystery of what LemonKiwi, would have said to any of this. But it has been a delight to talk to you guys. It's, the time has flown by. I know I've taken a lot of your time. Now you got to go. So we're going to have to sign off with relative promptness. But thank you so much, guys, for your time. Guys, if you're listening to this right now on Twitch, then exclamation mark before any of these guys' names. We'll bring their socials up, and later on YouTube, they will be in the video description. So make sure you check them out. Any final words, guys, before we sign off?
Just thanks for having me. This was like my first ever podcast, first ever big discussion. So it was fun. And while I might have looked at it from a more like casual viewer, like just a viewer perspective rather than a competitive perspective, I hope I was able just to at least shine light on a perspective that we don't often get to see, which is like, just your everyday Overwatch player. And it was fun. And Custa, a big fan of you. It was awesome to be in a piece of content with you finally. So yeah, really appreciate it, SVB, and I hope I can be brought on more in future episodes.
Yeah, I echo that. Thank you very much for having me on here. It's been a lot of fun. I love having these discussions. I love going back in time and talking about stuff because I'm just like a straight up boomer. So it's like talking about my glory days. But no, it was awesome having LemonKiwi getting a casting. And yeah, like Zach, it's awesome having you, like someone who's like made a lot of content, who plays the game. Like you understand the high level, but you just like, you're playing it for fun. And I think that's what a lot of people, including myself, who like are so at the top and we're just so worried about competition, we always forget about the large majority of the player base that's just here to have a good time. So it was a lot of fun. And yeah, once again, thanks for having me on.
That's a pleasure. And that's kind of what I like to try and do with these podcasts, is bring different perspectives. So don't apologize at all, Zach. Like, that's exactly why you're here. Because, there's always going to be people watching who are like, yeah, but I've never experienced that. That's not my game. So I always like to have that little diversity of opinion. That's why I love bringing YouTubers on as well. Because, I started YouTube, but now I spend a lot of time streaming. So I see a lot of that duality. And I think YouTubers tend to understand a little bit better the more the average player experience, whereas a lot of streamers are really good. They're too good at the game, so they sometimes remove themselves from what the player is going through in gold. So I appreciate you guys so much. I know you got to get going, so thank you very much, guys. We're going to take a quick break in this stream, and we'll be back after like 2 minutes. But thanks to these guys, and go check them out. Peace